Chapter 404. In the dining hall of the palace. On the huge dining table, there were only Li Onping and Anna, but there were at least hundreds of dishes from all over the world. All over the world was not an adjective. Due to the existence of the space warp gate, these dishes were all from famous kitchens from all over the world. The local head chef personally prepared the dishes and then sent them to Li Onping's table. Although Li Onping did not need food, a single word from him was enough to make the people below him busy for half a day to prepare the most high-end dishes for him. Although there were only the two of them, Li Onping did not feel that there were too many dishes and that it was too wasteful. It was because humans had never had such abundant food reserves as they did now. On the entire Earth, regardless of whether it was animals or plants, all of them were thriving under Li Onping's control. The wastage of food did not affect humans at all. Li Onping pointed to a plate of beef and said, "This is grilled beef tendon made by the Tyrol royal chef. It is cooked with unique spices, and the preparation time alone takes 6 hours. They specially selected black cattle bred in the crevices of Tyrol, and it tastes pretty good. I got them to order it yesterday. Try it." Although Li Onping had not eaten this famous dish before, he had the ability to monitor the entire Earth. There was nothing on Earth that he did not know. There was no need for Li Onping to give any instructions. With his introduction, the maids at the side had already taken the initiative to cut up the grilled beef tendon and put it on plates, sending them to Li Onping and Anna's plates. Seeing Anna take a small bite, Li Onping asked expectantly, "How is it? Is it good?" Anna revealed a smile. "It's very tender and very flavorful. It's good that you like it." At the next moment, the two of them once again fell into silence. Although Anna had already agreed to marry Li Onping, this was the first time the two of them had met in the past few months. Compared to the previous time, Anna was still filled with youthful vitality. It was unknown if it was because of her work experience, but her beautiful face had become thinner than before. However, she also had an intellectual disposition. As for Li Onping, he had always been in control of his physical structure. As long as he did not take the initiative to change, there would not be any slight physical changes to his body. However, Anna knew that Li Onping was very different from the past. This was especially so when he changed the world and completely changed the entire Earth's environment. That godlike power made ordinary people feel that he was very far away from them. In fact, there were already many religions that worshipped Li Onping on Earth. They worshipped Li Onping as a god, and there were many people who joined them. Although the government felt that it was a little strange, they did not prohibit them as long as they did not break the law. In particular, the god they worshipped was the current master of Earth. When the government made decisions, they would of course take into consideration Li Onping's feelings. They even suspected that Li Onping was not happy to see this. However, to Li Onping, who was constantly monitoring the world, these things were just a small wave. Even though it would not be an exaggeration to say that his current power was that of a god, if these religions really crossed the line, Li Onping would deal with them himself. However, this phenomenon of Li Onping ascending to the altar made Anna feel that she was getting further and further away from Li Onping. However, for some reason, when Wang Chong personally came to ask her if she was willing to become one of Li Onping's wives, she still agreed. In the depths of her heart, there was always a soft place where she still had feelings for Li Onping back when she was in university. Amidst the silence, Li Onping took a bite of the beef tendon on the plate. However, the exquisite taste was unable to attract his attention. Looking at Anna, he suddenly asked, "Are you afraid of me?" "Huh?" Anna suddenly lifted her head in surprise. She looked at Li Onping and said, "No, I just feel that time has passed very quickly. I feel that you've changed a lot." "That's right. I still remember when we were in university, we were still working together. In the blink of an eye, you've already graduated as a postgraduate and have been working for 1 year." Anna suddenly laughed softly. "Do you still remember the road next to the Polytechnic Institute? When I went back to take a look last year, they had changed the name of the road to Li Onping Road. They even built a statue of you and placed it in the square." Of course, Li Onping knew about this. Not only did he know about it, but he was also able to see the scenery of Li Onping Road and his statue through the endless nanobugs. Back then, the university was forced to expel him due to the pressure of the case. Later, they wanted to ease the relationship between the two parties through various flattering behaviors. However, Li Yonping naturally didn't have time to pursue this kind of trivial matter. However, the new mayor of Zhongdu City thought that he understood the situation. In order to please Li Yonping, he cleaned up the entire university. All the people related to the expulsion of Li Yonping were all fired. Although he knew everything, when he heard Anna's words, Li Yonping still pretended to be an ordinary person who didn't know anything. He smiled and said, "Is that so? If there's a chance, let's go take a look together. By the way, have you been busy with work recently? Are you happy at the warp center? Do you need me to help you change your position?" "No need." Anna shook her head and said softly, "I like the work at the warp center. The feeling of being at the center of the world makes me feel very comfortable. As long as you like it." Li Yonping suddenly took out a tube of medicine from under the table. He shook his finger and the medicine floated in front of Anna. "This is the medicine of immortality. Although it can't truly make a person immortal, it can greatly slow down the aging of the human body and increase the lifespan of a human." Because Li Yonping had mastered the technology of freely synthesizing elements, the RAS had overcome one obstacle after another with his help. Humanity had ushered in an era of unprecedented wealth. The medicine of immortality was naturally one of them. The price of this medicine was about the same as gold in the past. However, Li Yonping didn't let the RAS popularize the medicine for the time being. Right now, humanity's mental state wasn't enough to handle an excessively long lifespan. This would lead to many ethical problems. Li Yonping's plan was to popularize the medicine of immortality after the profound web was fully opened and humanity's mental and moral standards were greatly improved. Of course, as people who were close to Li Yonping, Anna, Li Qian, Xiao Xuesu, and Claudia were naturally able to enjoy this medicine in advance. Anna took the white medicine and looked at this immortal medicine that only existed in legends. She couldn't help but reveal a surprised expression. However, when she thought about how the other three women would definitely have this medicine as well, an indescribable sourness appeared in her heart. Just as this sourness appeared in her heart, a pair of warm arms hugged her from behind. Li Yonping appeared behind her, as if he had teleported and hugged Anna. When the surrounding maids saw this scene, they all silently retreated. Anna felt the other's breath on her chest, and a trace of redness appeared on her face. The feeling of unfamiliarity and alienation from before seemed to have disappeared with this hug. She weakly struggled a few times but couldn't break free. In the end, she turned around to look at Li Yonping and discovered that he was also looking at her in a daze. This made her blush even more. Feeling a wave of desire rise between the two of them, Anna closed her eyes in resignation. However, her constantly trembling eyelashes showed that she wasn't calm at all. However, after a long time, the intimate action she imagined didn't happen. She couldn't help but open her eyes in confusion. Li Yonping? A strange feeling rose in Anna's heart. Was Li Yonping distracted? Li Yonping seemed to have suddenly reacted. His body retreated, and he appeared in his original seat again. He said apologetically, "I'm sorry. There was a fire in Flanstein City just now. I was distracted for a moment." "Yes, it's fine." Although Li Yonping took the initiative to explain, for some reason, Anna felt that his distraction wasn't that simple. The intimate atmosphere also disappeared because of Li Yonping's retreat, but the distance between Anna and Li Yonping had completely disappeared. She tried to find a topic to talk about. "Yesterday, the news said about the White Land. Is it true?" "Yes." Li Yonping nodded. Recently, he had gradually announced the existence of the White Land to the entire human race through various major media channels. However, in the news, the White Land was just an accident related to the spatial door experiment. The so-called demons and magic stars hadn't been announced yet. If these things were announced too early, it would easily cause panic. Therefore, Li Yonping only spread some rumors to let the humans slowly accept this fact. When the overall strength of the human race had developed to a certain extent and they had strong confidence, he would truly announce this news to everyone. You know about the demons, right? Lianping glanced at Anna and said, "Yes." Anna nodded. She thought about the information regarding the demons and still felt astonished. "Lord Wang Chong told me about it. It feels like a legend. Do you think we'll be able to go against them 1 year later?" "Don't worry." Lianping revealed a smile and said calmly, "As long as I'm around, no one will be able to destroy Earth." Just then, the maid at the side walked up once again, seeming to want to report something. However, Lianping only shook his head. The maid did not say anything and started to serve the dishes. Xiao Xuesu should have been by Lianping's side, but she seemed to know that Anna wasn't used to having multiple wives and concubines. In order to prevent awkwardness, she did not come over. After dinner, Lianping personally sent Anna out of the palace. Looking at her departing back view, his disposition changed. There seemed to be waves of cold air seeping out. The warm and gentle aura had completely disappeared. With a flash, he disappeared from Earth and arrived on the land of the magical star. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Mobile phone users, please read it at M. Chapter 405. On the continent of Mondo, the conflict between the Earth's army and the local army was getting more and more intense. After Holy Roland and wise men were occupied one after another, the only sorcerer Marshal Isa left the Fago Empire with 20 sorcerers after witnessing Lianping's power with his own eyes and pledged allegiance to the Earth's army. The remaining 3 empires, including the Fago Empire, finally realized the crisis of the situation. They completely stopped the internal strife between countries and between the higher-ups and truly united together. More than 10 million soldiers, 600 sorcerers, and even more than 200 giant dragons rushed over to join the army against the evil gods. Lianping had been completely described as an unpardonable evil god in all the places that had not been occupied by the Earth's army. Starting from the border between Holy Roland and Wiseman, the battle line that spread for thousands of kilometers seemed to have burned the entire continent of Mondo. After the Magic Alliance suffered great losses in several head-on clashes, they immediately changed their battle strategy. In the past, ordinary soldiers would charge head-on while the sorcerers would release magic from the rear. Now, they were fighting against the powerful firepower of the Earth's army. The soldiers became the cannon fodder to attract the firepower, while the special forces formed by the sorcerers took the opportunity to sneak in, execute beheadings, and wantonly destroy the various weapons of the Earth's army. Some of the sorcerers also tried to study the principles of the weapons after seizing the weapons of the Earth's army. However, due to the serious lack of scientific knowledge, they could only use some simple firearms at most. At first, such a guerrilla tactic was successful, but soon the Earth's army concentrated their forces. Most of the units were loaded onto the floating aircraft carriers. The plasma shields on the carriers were activated by the antimatter engines, which were not something that the sorcerers could break. After the complete failure of the head-on battle, the sorcerers of the Magic Alliance could only rely on prophecy magic to constantly attack the weak points where the floating aircraft carriers were not. However, this was led by Xinghe personally. In front of the rapid response force that fought through the warp gates, after a few successful attempts, it was difficult to be effective again. The cities that were occupied by the Earth's army were all set up with warp gates. In addition, there were hundreds of spy satellites orbiting the atmosphere of the magic planet. These warp gates were like nails, firmly stabilizing the territory occupied by the Earth's army. The magic shooters might be able to circle around to the rear of the Earth army through the portal, but as long as they were in an important battle position or even launched an attack on a certain large town, they would be annihilated by the rapid reaction force that would rush over through the portal. Thus, after learning of the existence of the warp gate, the most important task for the mages before attacking a stronghold was to have some mages who were proficient in shape-shifting and charm humans sneak into the enemy's base and wait for an opportunity to destroy the warp gate and prevent the reinforcement of the rapid response team. In this way, countless sorcerers led the superior mages and inferior mages to form hundreds of mobile combat teams. All of them circled to the rear of the enemy and began to recapture or destroy the positions occupied by the Earth Army. However, as long as they could not compete with the 6 aircraft carriers and Bai Xinghe in a head-on battle, such guerrilla warfare could only buy them more time. Due to the scattering of the magic shooters, they were even more defenseless against the team led by Bai Xinghe. As the sorcerers fighting in the enemy's rear were captured and killed one by one, the disadvantage of the allied forces grew. Finally, today, the capital cities of the remaining 3 empires were all breached, and the entire Mondo continent was engulfed in the flames of war. The 6 aircraft carriers gathered once again. 10 kilometers away from them was the number 1 fortress of the Mondo continent, which had 500,000 soldiers and more than 400 magic shooters. Behind it was the headquarters of the Mondo continent's mage guild. Once that was captured, it would be an unprecedented blow to the entire magic allied forces. Thus, despite knowing the strength of the Earth Army, countless magic shooters still rushed over, swearing to stop the invasion of the evil gods even at the cost of their lives. In the sky, hundreds of dragons pounced toward the location of the aircraft carriers. Their powerful strength and magic gave them the speed of a fighter jet. However, what awaited them were hundreds of interceptors the size of small cars. Seeing these little fellows that were less than 1/5 their size flying around like bees, a hint of wariness appeared in the eyes of the dragons. A dragon roar sounded. Through the telepathic connection, the orders of the Allied Forces commander reached the ears of every dragon. Ignore those little boxes. Pay attention to intercepting the iron birds. The little boxes naturally referred to the interceptors, and the iron birds were the fighter jets. After many battles, the higher-ups of the Allied forces already knew that the interceptors could only shoot a type of blue light. It was powerful against the air, but it was not much of a threat to the ground troops. The iron rods, iron balls, and so on released by the iron birds were a great threat to the construction works and the ground troops. They saw the dragons collide with the torrent of interceptors. Countless blue pulse rays hit the scales of the dragons. 1 or 2 shots might not be a problem, but after dozens or hundreds of shots, even the strongest dragon scales would melt. Almost every second, there would be a dragon wailing and falling to the ground. However, there were also more interceptors that were crushed, smashed, or destroyed by the flames or magic of the dragons, turning into wreckage on the ground. However, every dragon was a life that took hundreds or even thousands of years to form. As for those unmanned interceptors that were only controlled by computers, any production line on Earth could build 5 to 6 interceptors in a day. This was an unfair exchange, but the dragons could do nothing about it. Seeing that the dragons had temporarily blocked the enemy's aerial attacks, the sorcerers in the fortress immediately started casting spells according to the plan. As terrifying magic waves rose, the entire sky was illuminated by dark clouds. Sibelius shouted into the communicator, "It's a level 10 destruction spell, Glory of Thunder. At least 100 sorcerers are casting it together. I'm not sure if the floating aircraft carriers can withstand this spell." Bai Xinghe nodded and ordered, "Activate all plasma shields at full power." Fan Yuhuang helped defend against this spell. Fan Yuhuang had been cultivating for a long time and absorbing the insights of the Queen of Heaven. Although he did not break through to the 6th energy level like Xia Laikong, he had reached the peak of the 5th energy level, just like Bai Xinghe. Now his 33 paradises had also reached the 27th paradises. Following Bai Xinghe's order, the sky above the 6 floating aircraft carriers was completely covered by a layer of distorted space. It was only 1 meter thick, but it had become a world's end with a depth of over 140,000 kilometers. A white light flashed in the sky, and in the next moment, countless thunderbolts came crashing down like pillars of light, as if they had violated the laws of nature. Each of the tens of thousands of pillars of light contained a high temperature of over 10,000 degrees Celsius. The electricity contained within them was enough to supply an entire city with electricity for an entire year. If the 6 floating aircraft carriers only had plasma shields, it would be difficult to ensure that they would remain undamaged even if these tens of thousands of thunderbolts came crashing down. However, due to Fang Yuhuang's presence, these thunderbolts had already traversed 140,000 kilometers of space in just 1 or 2 seconds before they came crashing down. Unlike light, thunderbolts had to expend a lot of energy to travel through the atmosphere. After traversing 140,000 kilometers, most of the thunderbolts had disappeared without a trace. Only a small portion of them bombarded the plasma shields of the floating aircraft carriers, causing ripples. Looking at the scene before them, the Earth's army was naturally cheering, while the Magic Alliance's army was in despair. Fire! Following by Xinghe's order, the railguns, Gaussian cannons, plasma cannons, laser cannons, and other weapons on the floating aircraft carriers were all aimed in the direction of the fortress. In just 5 minutes, the strategic magic barrier that enveloped the entire fortress was already on the verge of collapse. However, at this moment, a few more beams of starlight flashed in the sky. Huge pillars of light that were dozens of meters thick directly penetrated the defensive layers set up by Fang Yuhuang and then bombarded the plasma shields without any hindrance. It's laser weapons. They're coming from outside the atmosphere. There's more. Following the exclamations in the command room, another 5 beams of laser light bombarded the 5 floating aircraft carriers. The plasma shield powered by the antimatter engine only lasted for 10 seconds before it was penetrated by the terrifying laser beam. The 6 aircraft carriers were pierced with a huge hole in their hull. Then, in a series of explosions, billowing smoke, they fell to the ground. At the same time, when the floating aircraft carriers were hit, the ground around them was already shrouded by countless pillars of light, plowing the earth fiercely. All the animals, trees, rivers, and hills on the ground were all vaporized by the endless high temperature. Seeing that the floating aircraft carriers had fallen to the ground, everyone in the fortress yelled loudly, "It's Demigod! It's Lord Dionysus! Kill all these demons!" Without the threat of the floating aircraft carriers, the 500,000 soldiers in the fortress poured out in full force. The sorcerers who had consumed a lot of their magic power to cast level 10 spells also used their own methods to recover and followed closely behind. On the other hand, the Earth's army suffered heavy losses due to the crash of the floating aircraft carriers. Most of the ordinary soldiers were directly killed by the fall. As for the ability users, except for people at the level of by Xinghe and Xia Laikong, most of the survivors were injured. Most of the weapon systems of the floating aircraft carriers had also been destroyed during the crash. Only a few of them were still operational, but due to the location of the crash, only a few of them were aimed in the direction of the fortress. Faced with the surging magic army in such a state, Bai Xinghe and the others all had grave looks in their eyes. Even if they could win in such a state, it would probably be a Pyrrhic victory. The natives who had submitted to the military force of the Earth's army and been conquered and taken in could also very likely break out into chaos again because of this. Right at this moment, a white light flashed across the sky, and Li Anping's figure appeared before the hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the fortress. When he raised his head and looked at the sky, countless data and formulas flashed through his mind. His eyes directly used infrared observation to traverse a distance of several thousand kilometers and saw a certain spot in outer space. However, there was nothing there now. Using the spatial gate to relay the high-energy laser to achieve ultra-long distance attacks from light years away. Location of the main body unknown. At the same time, Li Anping did not need to turn his head. All the data within a 10-kilometer radius had been collected in his mind. Are the attacks near here to prevent the shots from missing? There's the aura of prophecy magic. Even light-speed attacks require the assistance of prophecy magic. It seems that he's hidden further away than I thought. Just as Li Anping arrived, the army of hundreds of thousands had already charged toward the Earth's army like a torrent. The soldiers at the forefront only saw a blur before their eyes, and then they saw Li Anping standing alone before them. Without much thought, these soldiers had already raised the large swords in their hands and slashed viciously toward Li Anping. Chapter 406. Just as this soldier, slashed the top of Li Anping's head. The surface of Li Anping's entire body changed. With the diameter of 1 atom as the thickness, countless atoms were squeezed together by the strong interaction force. 50 atoms were forcibly stuffed into the position where there was only 1 atom. They covered Li Anping's entire body in an orderly manner, forming a structure similar to adamantium alloy. However, regardless of whether it was in terms of strength or hardness, it far surpassed the original adamantium alloy. From the outside, Li Anping's entire body seemed to be covered by a layer of silver metal. When the soldier slashed his head with his sword, he felt as if he had slashed a mountain. The powerful reaction force caused the web between his thumb and forefinger to crack. Then, the other soldiers behind him also crashed toward Li Anping's position like waves. However, a force field rose behind Li Anping. The force field was like an invisible barrier, and the soldiers who were charging like waves crashed into the force field. The scene was like a piece of tofu crashing into a wall. The soldiers in the first row had their bones broken from the impact. However, before they could cry out in pain, the soldiers in the back row had already crashed into them, twisting their bodies into various shapes. Due to the transparent force field, the soldiers in the back had no idea what was going on in front of them. They could only keep charging, causing all kinds of trampling, crashing, and other situations. The entire Alliance army's charging formation was instantly blocked. This was also Li Anping's goal. He had calculated that Dionysus's attack method was to relay the attacks through multiple spatial gates. In other words, through several spatial gates that had been opened in advance. The laser would pass through these spatial gates to achieve an ultra-long-distance superluminal attack. Under such circumstances, even Li Anping would not be able to accurately pinpoint Dionysus's location. When he came to this conclusion, he made an appropriate response for 3 purposes. The first was to eliminate the army in front of him. The second was to eliminate them slowly, giving Dionysus some time to think. He wanted to see if Dionysus would be able to hold himself back. This force could be said to be the last large-scale resistance force on the entire Mondo continent. Once this force disappeared, there would no longer be any forces on the entire Mondo continent that could resist Earth's military. However, judging from Dionysus' character, Li Anping was sure that Dionysus wouldn't come to his aid. In his heart, perhaps the entire Mondo continent was not as important as him. Third, it was to test out Li Anping's new idea. It was the force field armor he had created by changing the strong interaction force and the arrangement of atoms. As humans continued to develop in the White Land and the original universe, the situation they would encounter in the future would definitely become more and more dangerous, and their enemies would also become more and more powerful. Many of the weapons that were still in use would gradually fall behind the times. Therefore, Li Anping designed many new weapons. The force field armor on the surface of his body was one of them. In the future, it might be replaced with exoskeleton armor in the form of exoskeleton armor. Li Anping, who was surrounded by the crowd, punched out. His fist had already pierced through several tens of soldiers, leaving behind rows of bloody mist. After the punch, Li Anping stood still. With the increase of the strong interaction force, the arrangement of atoms on the surface of his body changed again, and the density between them increased again. The strength has increased again, the friction coefficient has also decreased, and the light reflection ability has been enhanced. At this moment, the soldiers at the side roared and charged forward again, slashing toward Li Anping with their swords. However, as Li Anping pointed out with his finger covered by the force field armor was like an indestructible blade. It severed the soldiers' weapons, arms, and bodies, turning them into a pile of minced meat. As long as the strong interaction force keeps increasing until electrons are abandoned and the armor is purely made of neutrons and protons, the entire planet will be nothing more than a piece of glass for the person wearing the armor. A single charge will be enough to pierce through the entire planet. And in this case, the proton and the seed will stop moving completely, just like a large atomic nucleus. Conventional attacks will be completely ineffective. However, Using this kind of armor requires a force field to be maintained all the time. The stronger the armor, the more energy it requires. While thinking of this, Li Onping's body floated half a meter off the ground. Then with a dash, his body was like a sharp blade, slicing open a huge hole in the countless soldiers. Compared to Li Onping's current skin, the soldiers' armor and bodies were like tofu compared to a steel plate. The result of a steel plate falling into a bucket of tofu was the same as the result of Li Onping crashing into the group of soldiers. Wherever he passed by, he would only leave behind clouds of blood mist and pieces of flesh. Regardless of whether it was blades, spears, staffs, or all sorts of destructive spells, none of them were able to leave a single mark on Li Onping's body. Li Onping's means of attack were also very simple. He relied purely on the indestructible force field armor to continuously penetrate the enemy's formation, smashing them into pieces one after another. Li Onping was like a beam of silver light, constantly shuttling through the crowd. It was as if he was harvesting leeks, continuously reaping the lives of the native soldiers in large swathes. This was the result of him restraining his speed and strength as much as possible, slowly killing the soldiers. With a boom, a fireball the size of a car directly bombarded Li Onping's position. The terrifyingly high temperature directly affected the area within a radius of 10 meters, like a high explosive bomb. The explosive air currents produced sent all the surrounding soldiers flying. However, Li Onping seemed to have no reaction at all as he walked out of the waves of fire. The high temperature, which was enough to melt steel plates, was now like a cool breeze, faintly brushing past his body without leaving a single mark. The archmages in the back looked at Li Onping, who was constantly killing, and said angrily, "Hurry and stop him." Fireballs, ice arrows, lightning, and all kinds of offensive spells were launched toward Li Onping's position. In order to test the performance of the force field armor, Li Onping did not use any method to counteract these attacks. He directly used the force field armor on his skin to resist all the spells released by the other party. However, he was like a reef by the sea. No matter what kind of magical torrent he faced, let alone injure him, they could not even make him take a step back. Looking at the silver specter that was like a machine, silently reaping the lives of the allied soldiers, all the archmages revealed looks of fear. In just a few minutes, the continuous massacre had already left over 5,000 corpses on the ground. However, Li Onping still did not stop and kept repeating the same actions. He dashed to and fro in the crowd, knocking the soldiers into pieces one by one. His actions also caused the mages in the back to become more and more frenzied. They even completely disregarded the safety of the soldiers in front and began to cast all kinds of high-level spells. Huge meteorites smashed onto Li Onping's body, and he broke out of the rocks directly. The ultra-low temperature of -200 degrees Celsius covered Li Onping's body, but could not penetrate the protection of the force field armor at all. The thunderbolts that descended from the sky directly melted the earth, but they could not leave a single trace on Li Onping's skin. The various curses of necromancy, rays, and attacks of negative energy were the few things that could affect the force field armor. Ordinary physical attacks are completely ineffective. However, other means are needed to defend against radiation, rays, and other types of attacks. However, the defensive effect of physical attacks is already passable. It can also adjust the defensive strength of the force field armor according to the amount of energy output. When there were more than 50,000 corpses and blood stained the entire ground red, the crazy massacre finally aroused fear in the people. However, when some of them wanted to escape, they realized that an invisible force field had already enveloped the entire battlefield like a cage. Faced with the unstoppable demon in front of them, feelings of despair finally spread among the allied forces. 2 hours later, until Li Onping crushed the head of the last archmage, Dionysus still did not appear. Although it was as he had expected, Li Onping still revealed a sneer at the corners of his lips. Chapter 407. In the Battle of the Stronghold, the strongest resistance force in the Mondo continent was destroyed. The Mage Guild was taken over by the Earth's army. Countless materials, books, and materials related to magic were taken over by the army. There was also a group of mages who had escaped with their outstanding mage apprentices before the war to preserve the fire of the Mage Guild. They were all wanted by the Earth's military. As a result of the Battle of the Stronghold spread out, the entire continent was shaken again. Countless mages called this day the end of magic. Countless of originally scattered resistance forces had given up all resistance after knowing that the Mage Guild had also been defeated. Only a few stubborn ones still persisted in resistance. However, under the encirclement of the Earth's army, their defeat was only a matter of time. In terms of the overall situation, the entire Mondo continent was completely unified by the Earth's army. In the southwest of the Mondo continent, in a medium-sized city called Corinth, Walt and more than 10 soldiers were following behind a soldier wearing nano armor. They walked towards the square in the center of the city. Because of the Earth's army's rule and propaganda, at least now in public, no one dared to call the Earth's soldiers the Silver Demons again. Instead, they called them the Sky Guards, the Guard from the Celestial Realm, and the Celestial Realm. Although there were still occasional incidents of local natives attacking Earth soldiers, for most of the ordinary people, their lives after the war were much better than before because of the huge amount of food provided by Earth, coupled with their modified low tax rates and the soon-to-be universal magic education. This made many poor people have more faith in the legendary king of the Celestial Realm, Li Onping. Walt followed behind the Sky Guard and looked at the surrounding poor people who looked at them with fear, envy, and jealousy. He couldn't help but feel a little proud. He didn't expect that the matter of him surrendering to the Earth's army with extreme reluctance would become the best thing he had done in his life. However, every time this happened, he would always think of Ed. He was the one who gave the position of squad leader to Ed. Thinking about how the Celestial Realm had unified all the native armies into security forces, and how Ed had become a high-ranking security officer, he regretted giving up the position of squad leader. At this moment, the Heavenly Guard stopped and placed the huge instruments on his back on the ground. They were 2 strange cubes. After placing them on the ground, the Heavenly Guard pressed a few buttons on their surfaces. After a series of transformations, one of the instruments began to emit light, while the other began to spit out clouds. Although the Heavenly Guards did not say anything, just the Heavenly Guards themselves and the 2 strange-looking machines were enough to pique the curiosity of natives. As more and more people gathered around, Walt and his companions became vigilant, standing around to prevent the crowd from getting too close to the Heavenly Guards and the 2 instruments. What is that? He is exhaling. Maybe it's a divine beast from the heaven realm. The fact that it's breathing means that it's breathing. The other thing that's emitting light should be its eyes. The commoners were in a heated discussion. 2 people in long robes looked warily at the Heavenly Guards and instruments in the square. They were members of the Anti-Demon Alliance, a force established by the remaining magicians who were still resisting the rule of Earth. Both of them were magicians who had recently escaped to the city of Corinth due to the pursuit of ability users. One of the younger magicians asked, "There's only one Heavenly Guard. Should we attack?" The older magician shook his head. "Don't alert the enemy. We haven't been here for long. Don't attract the attention of those lackeys." The lackeys he was talking about were naturally the ability users from Earth who were in charge of encircling and suppressing the magicians. The younger magician nodded, but his eyes were still filled with hatred when he looked at the Heavenly Guards. He clearly remembered how his teachers, seniors, and classmates died under the enemy's cannon fire. He would always remember the day when the headquarters of the Association of Magicians was breached. Many magicians who were more powerful than him chose to commit suicide out of despair. The younger magician said fiercely, "What do you think they want?" "I don't know." The older magician shook his head. What the 2 magicians did not know was that while they were observing the actions of the Heavenly Guards, there were soldiers from Earth doing the same thing in all the large and medium-sized cities on the continent. If the Association of Magicians was the holy land in the hearts of all the magicians on the Mondo continent and the spiritual symbol of all the magicians, then the demigod Dionysus was the saint in the hearts of all the magicians on the Mondo continent. He was another spiritual symbol. The destruction of the Association of Magicians' headquarters caused a large number of magicians to give up resistance. Among the remaining magicians who were still resisting, except for a few who were mentally tough and indomitable, most of them relied on their expectations of Dionysus to persist. They believed that as long as His Excellency Dionysus appeared again, he would be able to lead them to defeat the demons and rule the world with magic again. Under all kinds of gazes, the soldiers from Earth slowly operated the instruments on the ground. These two instruments were a projection system and an air screen system. They were specially designed by Li Onping for the upcoming actions of the Magic Continent. The projection system could be connected to the cameras that were shooting in the distance through the satellite. However, here, the signals sent by Li Onping were received directly through the satellite. He projected the image of Li Onping's surroundings. The air screen system, on the other hand, used an electronic and thermodynamic system to suck in air, convert its imaging characteristics, and then release it to create a large range of water vapor fog wall. Using the principle of mirage imaging and the imbalance of molecular vibrations between the fog wall and the air, a specific image was formed. A few minutes later, the huge air screen was assembled in the sky. With the flash of the projection system, Li Onping's figure appeared directly in the sky. Almost all the citizens of Clorin could see Li Onping's figure clearly in the sky. Behind him was a boundless void and a dark gray land. All the citizens looked at the unique image in the sky curiously and in surprise, guessing the identity of the man in the image. The same thing happened in all the large and medium-sized cities in the whole continent of Mondo. In addition to countless civilians who heard the news and walked out of their houses to look at the sky, countless mages, whether they had surrendered to the Earth Army or insisted on resisting the Earth Army, all looked at Li Onping who appeared in the sky. They all vaguely guessed that the other party might have made some big moves again. The old mage hiding in the crowd of Clorin frowned and said, "It seems to be an image formed by some kind of water vapor. It feels a bit like a mirage." The young mage nodded and said, "I didn't feel the magic elements either. Is it the technology of the divine realm again?" Because the technological level of the Earth was too far ahead of the continent of Mondo. Therefore, although the mages of the continent of Mondo had seized and studied weapons and equipment from the Earth many times, the results were not great. In particular, the principles of these equipment were too broad, and they also had various advanced authorization systems, network systems, and DNA systems to manage. Many instruments were used well by the people of the Earth, but they could not be used in the hands of the mages. Some mages thought that if they wanted to defeat the demons, it was important to learn their strengths and techniques. However, some mages thought that all technological products were magic that belonged to the Silver Devils, and that they were a type of magic in essence, but only the Silver Devils could use this kind of magic. The old mage did not think so. He had always thought that the demons' weapons were similar to alchemy products, and that they were things that everyone could use. However, there was some secret that they had not discovered. Perhaps this was the key to defeating the demons. Just as everyone was talking and watching, Li Onping confirmed that all the projection systems and air screens were working properly and began to speak. He used the common language of the continent of Mondo. With Li Onping's computing ability, he naturally did not need to use language proficiency spells to grasp this language in an instant. Listening to his accent, it was no different from the locals who had spoken the common language for more than 10 years. Li Onping's voice was directly transmitted through the sound system below the projection system. Countless loudspeakers installed by the Earth Army in advance also began to broadcast his voice. These loudspeakers were originally installed by the Earth Army to better educate and rule the continent of Mondo, and to publicize some deeds of the divine realm or some basic enlightenment education. Now, it also spread Li Onping's voice to every corner of the city. The place that appears in the image is Moby 2 above your head, which is the Neteri you speak of, one of the moons of the magic star. I am Li Onping, your ruler. When Li Onping finished this sentence, there was a burst of exclamations in all the cities of Mondo. The mages hidden in the crowd looked at the expressionless Li Onping in the image with fear and hatred. It's the king of the gods, the ruler of the world. Please forgive our ignorance. You're our master. In a square of Clorin, countless believers who had now believed in Li Onping were the first to kneel down. Of course, whether they really believed in him or were afraid, or had received the communication from the Earth Army in advance, it was unknown. In short, as they took the lead to kneel down, the Nano-Soldier Alliance and security forces also knelt down. Then, when the other civilians saw this, they could only kneel down. Only a small number of people who were far away from the projection system and not near the square had the opportunity to not kneel. The older mage also knelt down. He pulled the young mage beside him and said, "Kneel down first, don't attract too much attention." The young mage looked at the sky stubbornly, but when he saw the people around him gradually kneel down, and finally he was the only one standing on the ground. When even the heavenly guards looked over, he sighed and cursed the evil god in his heart, and finally knelt down on the ground. Everyone looked at the sky and listened to Li Onping's voice as he continued, "I will bring you a life without worries, and give everyone the opportunity to receive an education. Although the continent of Mondo still has inequality, it will be at least 100 times fairer than before. But among you, there are still some who want to go back to the past and live under that rotten rule, deceiving people with lies." The young mage looked at Li Onping fiercely in the sky, wishing that he could go over and defeat Li Onping right now and then trample him under his feet. However, he knew that he couldn't do it because the difference in strength between the two was too great. So, he held back the anger in his heart and continued to listen to the other party. "Dionysus, I know that you can see me now and hear what I'm saying. 10 days. I'll live stream here and wait for you for 10 days. I'll give you a chance to compete with me fairly. Of course, if there are others who also want to challenge me, they can come over. I'll wait for you here." After hearing Li Onping's words, the older mage's heart sank. If no one could defeat Li Onping's deterioration in these 10 days, and if even Sir Dionysus failed and didn't show up, he couldn't imagine how heavy a blow it would be to the mages of the entire continent. On the other hand, the young mage beside him was full of excitement and began to look forward to the battle between the two. Chapter 408. During these 10 days, Li Onping stood silently on the second moon of the magic star, which was called Netera by the locals. The distance from the Mondo continent to Netera was enough to make most magic shooters despair. In other words, among the mages on the Mondo continent, there were no more than 3 who had the ability to stand in front of Li Onping if they wanted to challenge Li Onping. However, during these 10 days, no one stood in front of Li Onping and challenged him. During these 10 days, Li Onping's image covered the sky of the Mondo continent, giving the mages an extremely oppressive feeling. The confidence that came from thousands of years of magic civilization was completely suppressed by Li Onping at this moment. In the beginning, there were still countless mages who were looking forward to the demigod Dionysus teaching Li Onping a lesson in front of everyone. However, as time went by and the influence of Dionysus' absence, the confidence of all the mages was constantly eroded. That was exactly Li Onping's goal. He wanted to completely defeat the mages on the Mondo continent mentally. Of course, it would be best if Dionysus could be lured out. On the aircraft carrier that Li Onping had repaired personally, not only was the original damage completely repaired by Li Onping, but Li Onping had also installed the force field armor that he had just tested. It could increase or decrease the energy output according to different situations, and change the strength of the armor, which greatly improved the defense of the aircraft carrier. In the command room, Xiao Laikong looked at Li Onping in the image and asked the adjutant beside him, "How long until the 10 days are up?" 2 more hours, sir." Xiao Laikong nodded and suddenly asked, "Do you think Dionysus will come?" Golden Light, who was sitting on a chair, said, "After fighting for so long on the Mondo continent, he only dared to launch a sneak attack from afar. I think he won't dare to come." Yin Bei said calmly, "If he doesn't show up this time, he won't have another chance." On the other side, Bai Xinghe, who had been sitting cross-legged on the ground without giving up a single second of training, suddenly stood up. A mouthful of white air spurted out of his mouth. In the eyes of Xiao Laikong and the rest of them, 720 black holes seemed to be rising from his body. Even the light around him seemed to be twisted. Jing Guang glanced at Bai Xinghe, who was standing on his feet, with interest flashing in his eyes. Right now, other than Yin Bei, Bai Xinghe, the only one who had reached the 6th level, was the opponent he wanted to challenge the most. This was especially so after he stopped concealing the power of the 720 aperture acupoints. The energy gushing out from every part of his body was like several hundred active volcanoes. It was as if they could erupt with a power that could destroy the world at any moment. As for Lianping, Jing Guang had once dreamed of surpassing him. However, after seeing the current Lianping, such thoughts were completely gone. That was already a violation of the rules of the game and could be considered a bug. As long as Jing Guang's brain was not damaged, he would not have the slightest thought of challenging him. Bai Xinghe stood up and said, "If I were Dionysus, I wouldn't come here to seek death. I would leave this galaxy and find a place where His Majesty would never be able to find me. I would live my life there." "Oh, old Bai, this is not like you. You have no fighting spirit at all," Xiao Laikong joked. "It's not a matter of fighting spirit," Bai Xinghe said calmly. "In front of His Majesty, the so-called determination, talent, and hard work are all meaningless," Bai Xinghe said casually. "Such strength is beyond the imagination of human beings. It's like ants cannot affect the sun no matter how hard they try. They are not in the same dimension at all." Yin Bei frowned. "Although His Majesty is very strong, isn't it too exaggerated to say that? You don't understand." Bai Xinghe looked at Li Anping in the image and revealed a hint of fear. "When you become stronger, you will realize that His Majesty's improvement every day is far greater than the total combat ability of the 5 of us combined. The difference between addition and subtraction is not enough to describe it." Hearing Bai Xinghe's words, the 4 of them were all surprised and did not know what to say. At this moment, the entire aircraft carrier suddenly shook. Bai Xinghe was the first to react. Looking at the image in the sky, he said, "He really came." In many cities on the continent of Mondo, both the sorcerers who had surrendered and the sorcerers who were still resisting. The past 10 days were the longest 10 days of their lives. Thousands of sorcerers flooded into the cities and looked at the image in the sky, looking forward to Dionysus' arrival. They had been full of expectation at the beginning, but now they were deeply disappointed. 10 days were about to pass, and Dionysus was still nowhere to be seen. Their hearts became heavier and heavier. In the square of Crolin, the young sorcerer disguised himself as a vendor and had watched the live broadcast for 10 days. Even though it was the same image every day, even though Dionysus never appeared, he still continued to watch it. However, at this moment, the young sorcerer clenched his fists tightly. He had been learning magic since he was a child, and all his ideas seemed to have become so ridiculous. Seeing how frustrated he was, the middle-aged sorcerer next to him said, "The first requirement for a sorcerer is to be calm and rational. A sorcerer without rationality and calmness is not a qualified sorcerer." Mr. Dionysus did not come, which means that he is very powerful. With the power of a lord, we should not make meaningless sacrifices. Patience, accumulation, secretly accumulating power, and waiting for an opportunity. That is what we should do. I know. The young sorcerer's voice was somewhat low. "I understand what you're saying. However, if even Mr. Dionysus cannot defeat the enemy, can we? Can we really defeat those evil beings with magic alone? Even if we endure for 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years, will we really have a chance to defeat them?" Sensing that the young sorcerer had lost confidence in magic, the middle-aged sorcerer did not know what to say for a moment. Even though what he said seemed to make sense, even he had somewhat lost confidence in magic when Dionysus did not appear. Just as the 2 of them fell silent, the entire earth suddenly began to tremble continuously. Looking up, they discovered that the sky of the entire Mondo continent seemed to have been covered by a layer of shadow at some point. Li Onping stood quietly on the surface of Magic Star Satellite number 2. This satellite was somewhat similar to the Moon. Due to its small size and mass, its gravity was very weak, and it could not form an atmosphere. It also caused a large loss of air. The entire surface was similar to space, and it could not create an environment suitable for life. During the 10 days of waiting, Li Onping had been keeping in touch with the Earth military through the satellite on Magic Star. He had also kept in touch with Earth through the satellite, the network of the Amara Basin, the network of the White Land Base, the network of the space station, and the network of the Moon Base. Originally, Li Onping thought that Dionysus had given up everything on the Mondo continent and would not appear. However, he did not expect that in the last 2 hours before the 10 days were about to expire, Dionysus would appear in a state that was far beyond his expectations. A huge body appeared in the direction of the sunlight, and a huge shadow shrouded Magic Star number 2 and the Mondo continent one after another, as if night had fallen. It was a huge object that was 1/3 the size of Magic Star, but its appearance was not the spherical or elliptical body of an ordinary planet. From Li Onping's point of view, it was an image of Dionysus that had been magnified tens of millions of times. However, this giant's body had 4 more arms, making it a total of 6 arms. In addition, behind his head, there was a huge halo that emitted a colorful light. No matter how strong this giant was, just this size alone was enough to cause amazing destructive power. As he approached, the entire Mondo continent changed its course under the huge gravitational force. The rivers changed their course, the seas surged, the mountains trembled, and the magnetic field began to be affected. It could be said that even if this giant did nothing and just landed on the Mondo continent, it would be enough to completely destroy the entire continent's ecosystem and cause an unprecedented disaster. If he could exhale, he could create hurricanes like the Great Red Spot on Jupiter and destroy hundreds of countries with a single breath. If he could punch, one punch would be enough to sink the entire Mondo continent into the sea and create a deeper seabed in the sea. The ripples created by the punch would be enough to form tsunamis that were thousands of meters high. Looking at the terrifying giant in front of him, who could destroy the human civilization on the Mondo continent hundreds of times over just by relying on his own existence. A smile of anticipation appeared on Li Onping's face. The size of the opponent's body, the flow of energy, and the molecular structure of every part of the opponent's body were calculated clearly by Li Onping in an instant. However, he still smiled. His mind turned into an electromagnetic signal, sweeping it toward the opponent's body. Dionysus, I didn't expect you to be able to break through the limits of magic in such a short time and create a new power that belongs to you. This thing in front of me has far exceeded the scope of magic. You've really exceeded my expectations. Hearing Li Onping's words, Dionysus let out a cold snort, emitting waves of disdain in his mind. Li Onping, you don't understand at all. You don't understand how powerful I am now. But I'll let you experience it properly. The power that belongs to God. In the next moment, the giant raised one of his arms and smashed it toward Li Onping with a power that could shatter stars. Before the punch arrived, the change in gravitational force alone had caused the orbit of Moon 2 and the magic planet to tilt. In an instant, Li Onping had calculated that if the power of this punch were to hit Moon 2, the entire satellite would be sent crashing toward the magic planet. In an unprecedented collision, the continent would sink, and the surface of the entire planet would be submerged by the sea. The dust that would soar into the sky would be enough to cover the entire sky for more than 100 years. It's not suitable for us to fight near here. While sending this message, Li Onping flashed and appeared right in front of the opponent's fist. Then, he slammed his palm toward the opponent's fist. What level had Li Onping's strength reached? In the past month or so, he had liberated his power through quantum computing. His current combat power was equivalent to 32 times more than a month ago. So, if 32 Li Onping were to unleash their power at the same time, what kind of effect would it cause? It was like an ant trying to shake a tree. To everyone's surprise, the giant's arm came to a standstill. It was like an ant stopping the footsteps of an elephant. In the next moment, in front of Dionysus' eyes, which were filled with shock and anger, the force field covered most of the area. With the giant's fist as the point of effect, a force that was strong enough to move the stars suddenly erupted. The giant let out a furious roar, but it was still unable to stop Lianping from pushing it back for thousands of kilometers, far away from the location of the magical star. However, Lianping did not show the slightest hint of complacency on his face. Regardless of size, mass, or size, they were just the basic attributes of a giant in front of him, or even its flaws. Dionysus' true power was still far from erupting. Chapter 409. Before encountering the tide of chaos, Dionysus had finally comprehended the method of mass energy conversion after a battle with Lianping. He called it the so-called void creation. Theoretically speaking, he could turn any matter into energy, and he could also turn into any matter with energy. All matter in the universe stored invisible internal energy, and the amount of this internal energy was far beyond the imagination of humans. However, if one used the mass energy formula, they would be able to understand it very clearly. E equals mc caret 2, which meant that the internal energy stored in an object was equal to the mass of the object multiplied by the square of the speed of light. Therefore, even a gram of matter could be converted into energy equivalent to 25 million kilowatts of electricity in the hands of Dionysus. Dionysus, who had mastered this ability, would be able to destroy all the humans on an entire magical planet with a snap of his fingers. In fact, if he wanted to, destroying an entire planet would only take him a little more effort. If he continued to strengthen himself by absorbing the internal energy of matter, he might eventually become a super life form that surpassed stars, star clusters, nebulas, and even the entire galaxy. At this point, Dionysus had thought that he had found the path to becoming the strongest, until he encountered the tide of chaos and read the information that the other party had given him. According to Dionysus' understanding, what was recorded was a super life form called Buddha and their method of creating combat puppets. This combat puppet was called the Great Dark Sky. This combat puppet possessed great power, and in Dionysus' opinion, it was probably a terrifying weapon that could only be used in wars where the starry sky was the battlefield. Originally, although Dionysus had the method of mass energy conversion and could create things out of thin air, in terms of offensive means, it was equivalent to adding a new antimatter bomb. He could win purely through the accumulation of numbers. However, after the tide of chaos gave the refining method of the Great Dark Sky to Dionysus, he did not need to know too much at all. He only needed to provide the Great Dark Sky with endless energy, and then he could command this powerful weapon to launch all kinds of magical abilities that were beyond imagination. After obtaining the refinement method, it was too easy for Dionysus, who had mastered void creation and infinite energy, to do so. This also multiplied his destructive power. Therefore, when Lianping unleashed a power that could move stars and push the dark sky tens of thousands of kilometers away, although Dionysus was a little surprised, he did not panic at all. To him, the tides of chaos, as well as the Buddha who had invented a war weapon like the Great Dark Sky, were the targets that he would pursue in the future. As for Lianping, he was merely a frog at the bottom of a well who still had his sights set on the planet and the land. Do you want to change the battlefield? Naturally, I won't have any objections. To Dionysus, all the living beings on the Mondo continent were far less precious than his own life. However, if he could preserve his homeland, he naturally wouldn't object. After saying this, countless substances on Dark Sky's body detonated their internal energy. At the next moment, as several 10 million streams of flame particles shot out, Dark Sky's massive body flew toward the endless void space at sublight speed. Even though Dark Sky's massive body was comparable to that of a planet, he was merely a speck of dust in the vast void space of the universe. When Dark Sky was over 10 million kilometers away from the magic planet, Dionysus looked at Lianping, who was still standing on Dark Sky's fist. He let out a cold laugh and launched an attack. Immeasurable light. Over 1 million eyes on dark skies had opened at the same time. Countless photons were forcibly gathered in each of the eyes, turning into various rays, light balls, and even lightning bolts. They charged toward Li Onping at light speed. The pure white light seemed like a gift from the gods, but it possessed a destructive prowess that could penetrate through the continental shelf. Cannon fire formed from streams of photons? Is this the thing that's attacking the aircraft carrier? Just as the cannon fire formed from photons engulfed Li Onping, he swung both of his fists. Light-speed fists clashed against the streams of photons, and a massive explosion occurred on Dark Sky's fist. It blasted his fist, which was even larger than 100 moons, into countless fragments. However, under Dionysus's disdainful gaze, endless energy was released under his control. Then the entire fist was gradually restored using the void creation technique. This ultra-rapid regeneration ability had far surpassed the so-called regeneration ability. It would be more accurate to say that it was remodeling. Concurrently, the other 5 arms that were several thousand kilometers long slowly opened up, and the 5 massive fists punched out at the same time. It was as if the sky was collapsing and the earth was caving in, pressing down toward Li Onping's location. At the same time as the fist punched out, the gravitational waves that could cause severe space-time interference had already torn everything around Li Onping into the most basic particles. Due to the severe space-time interference, light was unable to transmit in a straight line, causing Li Onping to lose the opportunity to turn into light and leave. At the next moment, the 6 fists that had just been restored brought along a power and gravity that could distort space-time. It blasted out toward Li Onping, who was extremely small and unable to turn into light and leave. However, with Li Onping's boldness, even if the fist was larger than 100 moons, how could he possibly back off when faced with the incoming fist? There was no need to turn into light, and it was even more impossible for him to dodge. A sneer appeared on Li Onping's face. At the next moment, countless zero-point energy in the void had already gathered toward his arm, strengthening the electromagnetic force in his body at an incredible speed. Li Onping had already been able to control the annihilation of matter and antimatter as early as 2 years ago. He had also used this principle to perform the positron cannon once. However, Dionysus, or Dark Sky, who was facing him now, was a monster that could also release matter to achieve the same effect as the annihilation reaction. In terms of the mass of matter, Li Onping would definitely not be able to release more energy than Dark Sky through the same means. Therefore, he had chosen the vacuum zero-point energy that was more efficient for him. However, this was still only an increase in motivation. For the current Li Onping, his body that would grow exponentially with every cycle, and his overall combat strength would grow by 2 to the power of X, which was his strongest weapon. When he first returned to Earth, Li Onping alone was enough to adjust the orbit of the entire planet and change Earth's gravitational force. Then, how powerful could Li Onping, who is now 2 to the power of 8 times stronger than before, go? In quantum theory, the coupling constant was used to characterize the strength of the interaction. The coupling constant of the strong interaction force was 100 times that of the electromagnetic force, 100,000 times that of the weak interaction force, and 10 to the power of 40 times that of the gravitational force. If a person could release all the strong interaction force in each of his particles and still maintain his own existence, then he would become a Superman, and each of his punches would be enough to tear the sky apart. At this moment, not only did the gravitational force, electromagnetic force, strong interaction force, and weak interaction force increase wildly under Li Onping's control, but they also broke through their own scope of effect, completely releasing this terrifying power. The particles that made up Li Onping's entire fist seemed to have turned into dense chaos at this moment. At the next moment, the 2 fists, one big and one small, collided without any fancy moves. Time seemed to have come to a standstill at this moment, and space seemed to be on the verge of collapsing under this punch. When Dionysus received Li Onping's punch, he truly understood what it meant to have a punch that was as heavy as the earth. It was because Li Onping's punch was really F***king heavier than 10 magical stars. Without a sound, the fist that had just been repaired turned into the most basic particles under Li Onping's punch. It was not just a fist. Under this power that could truly be said to be world-shaking, Dionysus' entire arm disappeared. His entire body even showed signs of disintegrating under the effects of this power, flying backward uncontrollably. Li Onping continued to stand where he was. Other than his arm that had returned to its original state, he did not seem to have changed at all. Dionysus's thought waves turned into enraged electric waves. At the next second, countless sparks rose from the back of Dionysus. That was an antimatter explosion. Through the reaction force of the antimatter explosion, Dionysus, who had been sent flying by Li Onping's punch, not only stopped retreating, but also charged toward Li Onping. Dionysus's body changed intensely like a transformer, embracing Li Onping as if he was hugging him. At the same time, in Li Onping's eyes, countless gravitational waves and virtual particles rippled in space, interfering with this space-time and preventing him from escaping. How could Li Onping possibly escape? He merely let out a cold laugh and watched as Dionysus turned into an existence that was like a planet, completely enveloping him. According to the records and the information given to Dionysus by the Tide of Chaos, this move was known as the Avicii Hell. It was a move that those creatures known as Buddhas had created in order to fight against and seal the heavenly demons. Using the entire Dionysus as a cage, they sealed off the planet-level region. In the extremely vast plaza, Dionysus laughed out loud. Li Onping, this is the Avicii Hell. In this place, you won't be able to extract any vacuum zero-point energy, nor will you be able to carry out any unnatural energy transformations. The only thing you can rely on is your own physical body. After saying that, Dionysus had already walked slowly towards Li Onping with a magic staff that was more than 2 meters tall in his hand. I admit that your abilities are a little beyond my imagination. Your energy is clearly lower than mine, but you're able to injure Dionysus with a single punch. However, in this place, you won't be able to reproduce even the slightest bit of supernatural reactions. You can only possess the original power of your physical body. Although I can't extract energy to release magic, my body can be strengthened by countless arrays in Dionysus. What Dionysus didn't mention was that in order to maintain the Avicii Hell, Dionysus couldn't make any more attacks. Otherwise, why would he have stepped forward and directly killed Li Onping from afar? Let's fight like two warriors. At this point, Dionysus suddenly smiled and said, "Also, although this enclosed square is larger than the entire Mondo continent, I advise you not to escape. That will only reduce your chances of winning, which aren't high to begin with." Li Onping's face revealed a hint of astonishment, and he said in amusement, "You want to fight with me?" Dionysus snorted coldly and rushed toward Li Onping. "I'll let you know that your arrogance is the biggest reason for your defeat." Chapter 410. Dionysus waved his magic wand, bringing about a series of afterimages. He circled around Li Onping with a strange pace. "Li Onping, if you think that I'm just a pure mage who isn't good at close combat, then you're wrong. There was a period of time when I pretended to be an ordinary mercenary and traveled the entire continent. I learned the martial arts of various factions for over 10 years. While saying that, Dionysus' body was strengthened by the great dark sky's inner formation. His magic wand swept up the power of wind and thunder, and he tapped it toward Li Onping's right shoulder. The power of the formation that Dionysus had obtained was something that he had specially researched. It strengthened the physical body by regulating the human body's proteins, red muscles, and adrenaline. It was a completely scientific method, and it did not violate the rules of this universe like any other supernatural powers. Therefore, it would not be sealed by the Avicii Purgatory. The power of this attack had reached the limits that a human's physical body could reach. It was enough to overturn a tank. Coupled with the magic wand that weighed over 200 kilograms, Dionysus believed that this attack would be enough to shatter Li Onping's shoulder. However, at the next moment, the confident smile on his face froze, and he looked at Li Onping as if he had seen a ghost. Li Onping's palm was like a piece of steel plate, blocking the magic wand effortlessly. Dionysus' attack did not have any effect at all, and it could not even move an inch forward. Next, under Dionysus' astonished gaze, Li Onping grabbed his magic wand and broke it into two with a slight force. He then tossed the two pieces behind him. The sound of the air being pierced rang out, and the two pieces of the magic wand instantly disappeared from Dionysus' line of sight, like a supersonic plane. The entire process was like a primary school student who kept on harassing an adult with a toy, and the adult grabbed the toy of the naughty child and tossed it to a place where the naked eye could not see. The only difference was that the naughty child would cry, while Dionysus would not. Dionysus' vision blurred, and Li Onping had already grabbed him by the neck. Even if they were just relying on their physical bodies, the speed of the two of them was on a completely different level. With the structure of human eyes, it was impossible for them to see Li Onping's body. Then Dionysus felt as if his chin was being pressed down by a crane. Kacha-kacha sounds rang out in Li Onping's palm, as if his chin would shatter at any moment. Under his instinctive struggle, his fists kept on hammering on Li Onping, while his legs kept on kicking at Li Onping's chest and abdomen. However, it was to no avail. Li Onping's. He pinched Dionysus' chin. Seeing the other party struggle, he said with interest, "Infernal purgatory?" Boom. Dionysus was pinched by Li Onping's chin and slammed onto the floor. Even though it was a very light force for Li Onping, it was enough to shatter all the bones in Dionysus' body. The intense pain almost drowned his consciousness. Dionysus was still in a daze. He was still in a daze. This monster, is he human or not? How can a human's body be so strong? This is simply a dragon in human skin. No, it's a million times stronger than a dragon. How can a human have such a body? There had never been a human with such a strong body on the magic land, and Shang Tian had never given Dionysus any information about Li Onping, his life or achievements. He had fought with Li Onping twice, and he had always thought that the other party used energy to drive all kinds of moves. Who knew that under the appearance of a human, it was the body of a monster? With a loud bang, Dionysus' knee was crushed by Li Onping's foot, and he passed out completely. Can only use physical strength. With a clang, Li Onping gently kicked Dionysus in the waist again. Dionysus was sent flying like a ball. While he was in midair, all his internal organs had been turned into a pool of flesh and blood. Dionysus woke up from the pain and let out a miserable cry in midair. "You've been practicing martial arts for more than 10 years? With a boom, Li Onping left a huge pit where he was, and he had caught up with Dionysus in midair in an instant. Then, he grabbed one of the other party's legs and waved with one hand. Like a big windmill, he swung Dionysus' broken body around and then poured it into the ground, crashing it into a pool. A series of crackling sounds rang out, and it was as if countless pieces of flesh and bones were being forcefully squeezed together. When Li Onping grabbed Dionysus' head and lifted him up, the other party's consciousness was already in a blur, and his body had turned into a pile of tattered flesh and blood. Li Onping smiled and said, "How much is 1,000 to 7? All right, I'm the one who said that." What Li Onping said was, "Is close combat fun?" Then he clenched his hand slightly, and Dionysus' head was forcefully crushed into a lump like a crushed tomato. Endless white and red liquids splattered out. Li Onping could not be bothered to fend them off, and allowed them to splatter on his body and face. At the next moment, Dionysus' soul power gushed out from his body. However, Li Onping only had time to take a bite before that lump of soul power disappeared as if it had teleported. As expected, you have backup means. You're a guy who's afraid of death. It turned out that Dionysus was confident that he could teach Li Onping, who had lost his extraordinary powers, a lesson with his powerful physical body and exquisite martial arts techniques. However, as a mage, no matter how optimistic the situation was, he would always have backup plans prepared. Clearly, this calmness and cautiousness had helped him to survive this time around. When Dionysus stopped breathing, the anti-supernatural field of the Inferno had also stopped operating. All the supernatural powers that went against the laws of this universe once again appeared on Dionysus and Li Anping. Therefore, the necromancy level 10 spell, Reincarnation, which Dionysus had prepared in advance, was instantly activated. His soul was dragged into the backup body that had been prepared in advance through a means of quantum transmission. The moment he entered the body, he let out an earth-shattering roar. The raging flames and the fearful soul that had been tortured all turned into furious thought waves that gushed out in Li Anping's direction. Li Anping, I'll pull out every single one of your bones. I'll feed every piece of your flesh to the dogs. What answered Dionysus was Li Anping's earth-shattering punch. The strong interaction force, the electromagnetic force, the weak interaction force, and the gravitational force. The four forces in the universe were once again released by Li Anping. Like a cosmic monster that could crush everything, it slammed into the ground of the Inferno with unstoppable violence. The punch that surpassed the speed of sound was called the supersonic punch by Li Anping. The punch that could hit atoms and cause nuclear fusion was called the atomic bursting punch by Li Anping. The punch now could be called the quantum vacuum punch. It was the source, essence, and foundation of all the powers in the universe. It was the punch of creation that affected the macroscopic, and the impermanence created the impermanence. With a punch, the entire Avicii purgatory that the dark sky had transformed into collapsed. It was as if an ancient monster had drilled out from the surface of the dark sky, turning large areas of matter into particles and scattering them in the universe's vacuum. A terrifying hole that was over 30 times the size of Tianjin City appeared at the bottom of the dark sky. Dionysus, if you don't have any new techniques, I'm going to end this battle. Amidst Dionysus' furious roars, the dark sky returned to his original appearance. The parts of his body that had been destroyed by Li Anping's quantum vacuum punch were also gradually recovering under the amplification of endless energy. 6 arms that were over 1,000 kilometers long and could stretch across the entire continent surrounded the space around Li Anping. At the next moment, the colorful halo behind the dark sky's head flickered and the various parts of his body became increasingly brighter. At this moment, the dark sky's body seemed to bring about endless light. Chapter 411. When the white light completely enveloped Li Anping's body, a unique change started to take effect on his body. The entire natural world is made up of 10 dimensions, and our universe is a 4-dimensional space-time. To put it simply, the 1-dimensional space is a point, the 2-dimensional space is a line, and the 3-dimensional space is a 3-dimensional space with length, width, and height. The 4-dimensional space is based on length, width, and height, as well as time. 2-dimensional space only has length and width, but no thickness. Therefore, all 2-dimensional creatures are unable to see the full appearance of 3-dimensional creatures. In their eyes, humans are the amalgamation of countless planes, and they will forever only be able to observe one plane. It looks as if a person has been sliced into countless pieces. Similarly, as 3-dimensional creatures, humans are unable to see the full appearance of 4-dimensional creatures. Just as 2-dimensional creatures are only able to see a certain plane of a certain human, humans are only able to see 4-dimensional creatures from a certain time period. The amalgamation of all the time periods is their everything. They are a whole and not countless individuals. 2-dimensional creatures can move freely in length and width. Once a 2-dimensional creature moves in height, regardless of whether it is 1 meter up or 1 meter down, it will be jumping from one plane to another plane. To other 2-dimensional creatures, they will disappear. Similarly, as 3-dimensional creatures, humans can move in length, width, and height measurements. If humans can move in time measurements, then regardless of whether they move forward for 1 second or backward for 1 second, they will disappear to the people around them. If 4-dimensional creatures really exist, Then they will be a super life form that has jumped out of the limitations of time and does not abide by the laws of causality. They will also be a life form that the human brain will never be able to visualize. Right now, when Great Darkness's entire body was covered by the white light, he temporarily gained four-dimensional vision. Everything about Li Anping appeared before him. Li Anping's birth, elementary school, middle school, high school, university, after obtaining his abilities, the battles in the central capital, the battles in Jadeite City, the battles in Tianjing, how he became the master behind the scenes of Great Xia, and then the battles with the Netherworld King, the battles with the new Emperor, the battles with Grey, the battles with the Star Alliance, the battles with Higram, the countless times he saved the country and the world at the next moment. Great Darkness's fingers moved gently. It was as if a three-dimensional creature had moved a two-dimensional creature from one plane to another plane. At this moment, as Great Darkness's fingers moved, Li Anping's figure seemed to be experiencing a replay of a movie. His body started to move backward continuously, moving in the direction of the past. In just a few seconds, his body had changed back to that of a university student, then a high school student, and then a junior high school student. The entire process was controlled by Great Darkness's inherent program. Dionysus was unable to understand the principles behind this attack, which was called radiant glaze flames. If he were to use his four-dimensional vision, his brain would probably go crazy. This was not a world that humans could understand with their inherent thinking. However, he only needed to know one thing. As long as the target was covered by the white radiant glaze flames, they would be forcefully pulled back to their past state. It would be as if time was flowing backward until they turned into the very first particles that formed the target's body, completely disappearing from the world. As Great Darkness's ultimate weapon, this was a means that was specially used to deal with the super life forms that could destroy planets and civilizations in the universe. The amount of energy it depleted was also an astronomical figure. As Li Anping's body changed, the part of Great Darkness that had turned into light also gradually dissipated into the universe. After depleting all of the energy, Dionysus ignited the material that formed Great Darkness, using the method of converting mass to energy to replenish the energy. When Li Anping turned into a boy who was about 1.4 meters tall and wore a primary school student's uniform, Great Darkness was only left with an arm and the part above his chest. His body, which was the size of a small planet, had been depleted in the process of performing the radiant glaze flames earlier. Dionysus controlled Great Darkness to stop its attack and let out a soft exhale. The radiant glaze flames depleted too quickly. It's too much. But this will do. The currently Anping, as Dionysus said that. He looked toward the primary school student Li Anping, who was in void space. A strange feeling suddenly appeared in his mind. It was still that detestable face, and it was still that high and mighty gaze that looked down on everything. Dionysus hated Feng Xinjian from the bottom of his heart. This guy is still so detestable, even after turning into a kid. Just then, Dionysus suddenly reacted. He looked at the primary school student Li Anping with some puzzlement. That's not right. In the universe, he should have died immediately. Although Dionysus was unable to completely comprehend quantum mechanics, the theory of relativity, and Great Darkness four-dimensional attack, the universe was a vacuum. He knew that ordinary people would turn into dried corpses if they were to enter. However, the current primary school student Li Anping appeared to be normal. There were no signs of him turning into a dried corpse, and this kind of normal appearance was the biggest abnormality. Damn it, could it be that he was already able to survive in the universe when he was 7 or 8 years old? What race on Earth was he born from? In the radiant glaze flames earlier, only Great Darkness had observed Li Anping through his four-dimensional vision. Until now, Dionysus still knew nothing about most of Li Anping's past. In addition to Li Anping's performance in the Avicii Purgatory earlier, it was only then that Dionysus started to suspect Li Anping's race. Just then, a stream of thought waves shot out from Li Anping's body, sweeping toward Great Darkness. Within a short 1/100th of a second, it was received by Dionysus. It's over? I thought that you'd turn me into a sperm or a pile of proteins. Dionysus looked at the primary school student Li Onping in disbelief. How is that possible? Could it be that you? An interesting four-dimensional attack. However, it doesn't have much effect on me. Li Onping clenched his tender little hands and said, simply going against the flow of time in a region only has a slight effect on the current me. I'm just a superposition of a certain possibility in both space and time. Regardless of whether my body is only left with a certain particle or turned back into a pile of proteins, there won't be any changes to my abilities at all, other than the visual effects on you. To me, such an attack is no different from slicing me up. It'll just deplete some of my energy. You'll only be able to truly kill my past self if you restart the timeline of the entire universe. However, if that's the case, the energy required will be sufficient for you to create and destroy several million universes. You won't have to go through so much trouble to kill me. A stream of cold gleam then emitted from Li Onping's eyes. He turned into light and appeared above great darkness's head in the next second. His little feet stepped on this head that was like a small moon, and he said coldly, "You don't understand? It's fine if you don't. I'll send you on your way." At the next moment, as Feng Xinjian stomped down with his right foot, great darkness's head seemed to have been struck by an invisible huge hammer. It suddenly caved in, and a crater that was the size of a crater appeared. In a multivariate universe, in a territory that the locals called the Xian region, a horse carriage was heading toward the Kunlun Mountains in the distance. Shang Tian, Kadia, and Night Beast were in the carriage. Shang Tian was lying on the bed with his eyes closed, while Night Beast was reading an ancient book nonstop. Only Kadia's face was filled with impatience. He looked at the two of them and then looked out of the window. Finally, he could not help but say, "Why are we taking a horse carriage? How long will it take to get there? If this drags on, Li Onping will reach the pinnacle. Have you forgotten the agreement between us?" "Of course, I haven't forgotten," Shang Tian said with his eyes closed. "But this world is much more dangerous than you think. If we were to casually take out things that are beyond common sense, we'll attract unnecessary trouble." "Then what about Li Onping's side? Are you really not going to care about it?" Li Onping. At the mention of this name, Shang Tian finally opened his eyes. "Do you know? That time in a magic world, I really wanted to kill Li Onping, but I failed. Although I don't want to admit it, it's true that Li Onping isn't someone that we can kill head-on right now. No, with how powerful Li Onping is, fighting him head-on would be a foolish action. Therefore, I've given up on fighting him head-on." Xiao Tian. Night Beast closed the ancient book and looked at Shang Tian with pity. At such a young age, this boy who was not even 3 years old was already shouldering a pressure that was far beyond what ordinary people could imagine. "It's okay, Uncle Knight. I've already thought it through. I won't fight him head-on anymore," Shang Tian said. "Next, let's just let those demons play with him." After that kick, Li Onping threw another punch at the great dark sky under his feet. The young and tender palm contained the most terrifying power in the world. After 3 consecutive quantum vacuum punches, Dark Sky's entire body disintegrated completely. Amidst the huge explosion, it turned into all sorts of wreckage and flew out in all directions in the universe. However, under Dionysus' control, those wreckage emitted an astonishing white light at the same time, turning into countless antimatter bomb explosions. Shang Tian lay down on the bed in the carriage quietly and said in an extremely calm tone, "There's no chance of winning if we fight him head-on. No, it should be said that regardless of the possibility, as long as we have to settle it through battle, there's no chance of success. In the entire multivariate universe, the only one who can defeat Li Onping is Li Onping himself." Violent energy engulfed Li Onping directly. However, it was just like seawater. Even though these energies filled up Li Onping's surroundings, they were unable to hurt him at all. On the contrary, Li Onping absorbed a part of the energy and turned his body back into his adult form. Such a pure, large-scale explosion was far from being able to concentrate the powers onto a single point. It posed no threat to Li Onping at all. At the next moment, the strong arm turned into an omnipresent light, piercing through the violent energy currents and striking out toward Dionysus, who was trying to escape. Dionysus had just wanted to open up a teleportation gate when his entire body was torn into several tens of thousands of fragments by the light-speed punch. Only Lianping can defeat Lianping. We can't. The immortals in this world can't. The demonic gods in the White Land might be able to gain the upper hand for a period of time, but they'll only fail in the end. Shang Tian's eyes flashed with a coldness that did not match his age. Therefore, we mustn't think about defeating Lianping in battle. The only thing we can do is to let him walk toward his own destruction. The end point of evolution is death. The moment we really become a god, the part of us that belongs to Lianping will disappear completely. After Dionysus's body was torn apart, he instantly turned into a ball of gas. He did not care about Lianping, who was behind him, and darted toward the spatial gate in front of him with all his might. This monster, this spirit, this damn guy. I want to leave this world and this universe. I don't want to meet this guy ever again. Amidst his terror, Dionysus darted into the teleportation gate. However, before he could feel at ease, he noticed that something was amiss. Where's this place? As Dionysus lifted his head to look around, cold sweat kept on dripping down from his head. Lianping's cold voice rang out from all directions. Welcome to my world. Dionysus immediately turned to look behind him. However, he noticed that the teleportation gate that had sent him here had already disappeared. It turned out that the teleportation gate that he had darted in earlier was the one that Lianping had opened up. Lianping had opened up this teleportation gate right before the one that Dionysus had opened up. The destination of the teleportation was his stomach. In his panic, Dionysus did not manage to identify the teleportation gate in detail and just darted in. In void space, Lianping closed up the teleportation gate that Dionysus had opened up slowly like a zipper. In his stomach, Dionysus, who had turned into gas, darted around and started to struggle crazily. However, he felt that his living body was being dissolved and engulfed with every passing second. When did you learn how to open a teleportation gate? It's just a simple replication of physical phenomena. Lianping said calmly, be it magic or anything else, I could do everything that you can do. Moreover, I'll only be able to do it better than you. In Lianping's stomach, no matter how Dionysus struggled, he was unable to break out. No matter what magic he used, it was immediately reversed and negated by Lianping using the same method. Amidst the agonizing cries and the pain of having one's soul being torn apart, the demigod Dionysus, the strongest expert of Mondor, finally disappeared from this world completely. Chapter 412. When Lianping waited on Demon Satellite 2 and watched Dark Sky appear, all the live streams on the Mondo continent could see this scene. However, after Lianping caught Dionysus' punch, and the two of them went into space together, away from the magic planet, the screen turned into a snowflake. A line of words appeared in the sky, indicating that Lianping and Dionysus had temporarily gone into the depths of the void to fight. In Rockland Square, the young mage clenched his fists. Even though Lianping and Dark Sky could no longer be seen on the screen, he still stared at the screen in the sky excitedly. Even his voice was trembling as he said, Lord Dionysus is really here. Will Lord Dionysus win? He definitely will. The elderly mage on the side was also a little excited. Did you see the huge magic puppet? That must be the weapon that His Excellency Dionysus created to deal with the evil gods. The reason why His Excellency didn't come so late must be that he wanted to seize the time to create the puppet. The young mage continued, now that Lord Dionysus has rushed over, it means that he has the confidence to win. That puppet is too great. It's simply a miracle that surpasses all magic devices. The same scene was happening in various places on the Mondo continent. The confidence of countless mages was boosted by this scene, especially when they saw the Mondo continent's enormous size. It far exceeded the mages' imaginations of magic. It gave them confidence in magic. This was because no one could imagine how Li Onping could defeat such a powerful puppet. More than half an hour later, on the floating battleship, the few streaks of starlight that suddenly appeared in the sky just now must be the battle between His Majesty and the others. What amazing power! Yanbei looked up at the sky and exclaimed, "Dionysus is really powerful. It's a pity that he chose the wrong opponent." "He's too unlucky," Golden Light said. "Challenging His Majesty is suicidal. It's no different from suicide." Xiao Laikong did not say anything. He was monitoring the situation in the cities on the Mondo continent. However, other than the fact that more and more people were watching the live stream, nothing unexpected happened. Bai Xinghe sat cross-legged on the ground. White gas burst out of the 720 acupoints on his body and enshrouded his entire body. Looking at how seriously he was cultivating, he didn't seem to care about the result of the battle that was happening far above his head. At this moment, a white light flashed, and Li Onping appeared in front of everyone. "Your Majesty, no need to be so courteous." Li Onping raised his hand, and countless particles were formed in his hand. They combined and finally turned into a disc. He said, "Dionysus has been dealt with. I've stored the battle record in it. You can play it first." The so-called battle records and battle images were also stored in digital format. Li Onping could naturally record his vision, hearing, and other memories. With his computing power, it was not difficult for him to create some images out of thin air like creating CG. For example, he tried his best to create the video of the battle with Dionysus from a third person's perspective. First of all, the video would be played on the Mondo continent to completely destroy the confidence and spirit of the sorcerers, so that it would be easier for Earth to rule. Secondly, the video would be recorded by the Earth government, just like the Battle of Tianjing and the battle with Demon Hygrim. It would be used as teaching materials for the battles of the superhumans and research materials for science and technology. In particular, the weapons that Dionysus used through the Great Dark Sky and the methods that Li Onping performed would be recorded. Except for the scene where Li Onping ate Dionysus, Li Onping would explain the general principles of the battle. "Got it." Xiao Laikong took over the disc from Li Onping's hand and handed it to his adjutant, asking them to play it on the air screen of the Mondo continent. Bai Xinghe, Jin Guang, Yin Bei, and the other soldiers from Earth also read the file curiously. Although they believed that His Majesty would definitely win, the size of the Great Dark Sky made Dionysus's aura very shocking. They were all curious about how His Majesty took care of him. However, after watching the video, they realized that they had greatly underestimated Dionysus's strength. His opponent was 100 times stronger than they had imagined. Photon stream, gravity wave, infernal hell, and light glass fire. The power of each of those moves was more horrifying than the last. If they had known Dionysus's strength before the battle, they would have been worried about whether or not Li Onping could defeat him. However, after watching Li Onping take care of Dionysus so easily in the video, they were shocked beyond words. When they saw Li Onping, who looked like a primary school student, smashing the Great Dark Sky into pieces with a few punches, all the soldiers from Earth exclaimed in shock. A sense of pride that belonged to the people from Earth, as well as a sense of security that Li Onping brought to them that they had never felt before. As long as Li Onping was behind them, they would feel fearless and invincible. The feeling of being invincible quietly rose in their hearts. Even though Bai Xinghe, Jin Guang, and the others had expected that Li Onping would definitely win, they still felt their blood boiling when they saw the video before them. However, unlike the excitement of the people from Earth, the natives of the Mondo continent had a different feeling when they saw the video that was being played on the screen in the air. Firstly, when they watched the video, they did not know that Dionysus had been defeated and killed. Therefore, when many mages saw Li Onping being drowned by the photon stream cannon and the gravity wave tearing Li Onping apart, they all cheered, looking forward to Li Onping's death. When they saw Li Onping beating up Dionysus in the Avicii Purgatory and not losing any of his combat ability after being hit by the light glass fire, they were all worried. At the end of the video, what they saw was the video that Li Onping had edited. In the video, Dionysus' body and soul were both killed by Li Onping with a single punch. When this video was played, countless mages on the Mondo continent turned pale. They looked at the screen in the sky in disbelief, as if their entire lives had been shattered into pieces by someone. In Krolan Square, the young mage knelt on the ground and looked at the still video in the sky with lifeless eyes. His head was buzzing. This was an impeccable battle of the century. Be it the great dark sky, controlled by Dionysus, or the unparalleled power displayed by Li Onping, they were all far beyond his imagination. However, this was what made him feel even more hopeless. Even Dionysus, who had the power to destroy the entire Mondo continent and a demigod with a magic level that he could never reach in his entire life, was so vulnerable in front of Li Onping. Then, even if the mages studied and studied magic, could they defeat Li Onping? Whether it was him or the middle-aged mage behind him, their eyes were all dim. A few months later, the middle-aged mage dispersed his magic power and gave up the path of magic. He became an ordinary old farmer and died of a heart attack more than 10 years later. Even before he died, none of his neighbors knew that he used to be a noble mage. After more than half a year of decadence, the young mage joined the magic school set up by the Earth government and embarked on the path of pursuing truth and becoming stronger. This was the last choice of most mages on the Mondo continent. As for the ordinary people, it was difficult for them to understand the meaning of many of the moves in the video. However, they understood that the power of the gods was far beyond that of the mages. The whole world would be ruled by the king of the gods, Li Onping. A lot of food would be provided to them at very low or even free prices. All they had to do was to listen to orders. In addition, the Earth government would set up elementary schools in every town and village on the Mondo continent in the following days. Apart from improving the cultural standards of the locals, it was also to filter out children with magical talent from the Mondo continent. The parents of these children would receive a sum of money, and these children with magical talent would be sent to the magic school on Earth from a young age for training. They would follow the sorcerers who surrendered to Earth and learn magic teaching materials written by Li Onping himself. They could choose to return to the Mondo continent during winter and summer vacations every year. After living on Earth for a long period of time, their actions and actions would be no different from those of Earth. They would be completely earthbound, and as long as they could pass the graduation magic exam and the review of their thesis, they would be granted a temporary residence permit on Earth. Next, if they could pass a series of rules and procedures, such as making a huge contribution to the government and gaining 30 points, or inventing new magic, they would gain 5 to 20 points. The higher the points, the higher the authority, and the closer the privileges they could enjoy were to that of an Earthling. In the end, they could even obtain a true identity on Earth or bring their family over from the Mondo continent. To the locals of the Mondo continent, Earth was the realm of the gods and the heavens. Countless people hoped that their children would be chosen and brought to the place where they would go. Of course, apart from the children with magical talent, some mages who already had abilities in the past could also join the Earth government. After passing a series of political reviews and academic tests, they would be assigned to different armies or ability user groups. If they didn't break any laws in the next 2 to 4 years and were willing to stay in the Earth Army and continue to spread the gospel, they could become citizens of Earth. Even so, there were only a few tens of thousands of people on the Mondo continent who could enter Earth. However, as more and more elementary schools were built, this number would increase. Chapter 413. It had been some time since the Mondo continent was completely unified. Bai Xinghe was still leading the fleet to attack the remaining 2 continents on the magic planet. It had been more than half a year since Hygrim's attack. According to the information in Hygrim's mind, his race, which was the evil god race where the Red River King of the 12 demon gods was from, would send people to the White Lands World Crossing Gate in the shortest half a year to a year. All the higher-ups on Earth who knew about this news were like clockwork machines. They worked hard to develop anything that could increase their strength. Earth's technology, especially the military's technology, developed rapidly because of Li Onping. Firstly, There were countless scientific materials written by the Divine King, the Red Queen, and Lianping. These materials provided the most accurate theoretical guidance for Earth scientists. Secondly, after the entire Earth was unified, the barriers between countries, cultures, and corporations were removed. There is no longer any technology that was repetitive and wasted time and money. All the research institutes, laboratories, and research institutes were managed by the RAS. All the research, design, and manufacturing plans were planned by Li Onping every minute and second. Apart from that, Li Onping himself was also involved in the manufacturing and design of various new weapons for Earth's military. With the existence of nano-worms and infinite computing power, his efficiency was even higher than all the scientists on Earth combined. In just a few short months, the explosive development of mankind's military power and technology had surpassed all of the past history. More than 10 aircraft carriers took off every day. The aircraft carriers were equipped with plasma shields, force field armors, antimatter engines, Gaussian cannons, plasma cannons, and other super advanced equipment. They had become one of the main forces of Earth's military on the ground. Apart from that, the fortress railguns, floating turrets, and interceptors that surrounded the portal turned the area around the space station into a death zone. Inside the space station, the newly produced Explorer 2 mechanical infantry became the main force. They were all operated by the central AI of the space station and had faster reactions than anyone else. They scanned and aimed with infrared, thermal radiation, electromagnetic waves, and other means. They released 255 millimeters depleted uranium bullets, plasma weapons, and plasma flames. In terms of killing efficiency and cost-effectiveness, they were even better than human infantry and aptitude users. A similar arrangement appeared on the land of White. Countless drones, nanobugs, mechanical infantry, and other devices monitored the area within 10,000 kilometers of the portal. On the other hand, the humans' true defensive forces were all set up within 100 kilometers of the world crossing gate. Floating aircraft carriers, defender robots, spider tanks, and all kinds of war machines walked down for the production line and onto the battlefield of the land of White. As for the human soldiers, they were regarded as precious resources and were all nurtured by Li Onping as the highest combat power. The interstellar armor, which was a combination of power armor, force field armor, nano armor, and other exoskeleton armors, had completed the transformation of all aptitude users. The next step was to replace all soldiers and complete the transformation of all ordinary people. This set of armor was more than 5 meters tall and weighed 2 tons. It was a combination of hundreds of high-tech equipment and possessed strength that was beyond the imagination of humans in the past. The power system alone was divided into antimatter energy tubes that could use Earth's technology, a nuclear fusion energy furnace, and a mageweth that could activate magic elements from level 1 to level 8 magic. The excellent life support system allowed the wearer to survive in various environments such as deserts, the bottom of the sea, the moon, space, and volcanoes. Coupled with the full coverage force field armor, the wearer could continuously withstand the bombardment of the floating battleship's main cannon for 10 minutes before all the energy was depleted. Every interstellar armor was also equipped with a quantum brain that could assist the wearer in combat. With the help of the quantum brain, the wearer could also command the nanobugs in the armor to freely assemble various cold weapons, communication equipment, long-range firepower, and so on. Other than that, there were all sorts of laser sabers, high-frequency daggers, phase transfer shields, Gaussian rifles, high-energy particle rifles, miniature tactical thermonuclear bombs, infrasound weapons, and so on. Every galactic armor was a mobile armory. In addition to the abilities of the various aptitude users and the magic programs that they modified on the mageweth to match their abilities, the stronger the wearer was, the stronger the combat power after wearing the interstellar armor. Every single one of these super soldiers was an existence that could rival an entire army in ground warfare. In addition to these ground troops, the first sublight speed spaceship had also begun flight experiments. This meant that humans were about to completely enter the universal era. Once the mass production of spaceships was realized, it would be extremely beneficial for both the battle against the demons in the space station and the expansion of the strategic depth of the human side in this war. However, most civilians still had no idea about the rapid growth of the human army's strength. In their impression, the so-called land of white and the demons were still just rumors and rumors. As for war, it was just a distant term for the time being. Earth New to Xia, a continent created by Li Anping. The entire New to Xia was completely covered in silver metal. Countless metal devices formed various energy circuits and defense systems. In the center of the continent was a huge cannon with a radius of more than 120 kilometers. This was the largest cannon in human history. Looking down from above, it looked like a bottomless black abyss. Li Anping floated in the depths of this abyss and personally adjusted the cannon's structure with the nanobugs. This was the product of the second stage of Li Anping's Earth transformation plan. It was the ultimate weapon of a small gamma-ray burst using the principle of the collapse and explosion of stars. As the most intense explosion in the universe, the energy released by a gamma-ray burst in a few minutes was equivalent to the total amount of sunlight released in 1 trillion years. The gamma-ray cannon created by Li Anping on Earth naturally didn't have such powerful power. Due to the excessive energy consumption, the energy stored for a month was only enough for this cannon to create a gamma-ray burst for 1,000th of a second. However, the power was enough to destroy any planet in the solar system. Li Anping would also create 6 similar superweapons in other locations on Earth to slowly transform Earth into an interstellar fortress, the eternal utopia of mankind. It was also because of the amazing power of the gamma-ray burst that Li Anping personally modified it. After all, this type of superweapon could even blow up the entire Earth if they weren't careful. Just as Li Anping quietly floated in the cannon, the doctor in the Federation began today's report. Your Majesty, the testing of the clone's life support system has been completed. The so-called life support system for the clones was a system that Li Anping had created for the Heavenly Queen's clones to be able to survive for a long period of time, even if they didn't have the nanobugs, or if they lost contact with them. As the premise of this system was that they would lose the support of the nanobugs, Li Anping had left the final testing to the doctor. Li Anping asked, "How's the situation?" With sufficient artificial nutrition, the clones will be able to survive until the maximum lifespan of the physical body, which is 150 to 180 years. However, the side effects of losing the support of the nanobugs for a long period of time will intensify. The doctor spoke for a few minutes and suddenly realized that there was no reply from Li Anping's side. He asked, "Your Majesty? Are you still there? Your Majesty?" The doctor looked at the communication device in front of him. Everything was working normally, so there shouldn't be a problem with the communication. Did he get distracted? The doctor frowned and thought, "It seems to be getting worse." In the beginning, it would only happen once or twice a week, and each time, it would only last for 1 second. However, this phenomenon is getting more and more frequent, happening almost every 2 to 3 days. The most serious incident was when he got distracted for as long as 5 seconds. To the doctor, who had a deep understanding of Li Anping's current state of life, this was something unbelievable. With His Majesty's computing prowess, even if he were to manage the entire Earth, there shouldn't be a situation where he gets distracted. This is as ridiculous as a 32-core mainframe crashing while playing Minesweeper. Just as the doctor was thinking about this, Li Anping's voice rang out. He said coldly, "Got it. I'll fix these problems within 3 days. You'll carry out the next test 3 days later." For a system that concerned the safety of the entire human race, Li Anping and the doctor would naturally carry out multiple tests. After hearing Li Anping's reply, the doctor fell silent for a moment. In the end, he still mustered up his courage and said, "Your Majesty, were you distracted earlier?" Li Anping said calmly, "It's nothing. It's just that the modification of some gamma rays parameters caught my attention." The doctor felt that this was definitely not the real reason, but there was nothing he could do if Li Anping didn't say anything. He could only keep this question in his heart. However, just like that, as someone who is extremely curious, perhaps the most curious existence among all level 5 ability users, the answer to this question was like a little kitten hiding in his heart, making him feel extremely itchy. He could only continue to talk about another matter. Right, Your Majesty, Sherwin told me that Miss Anna asked us to remind you that there are still 52 hours before the wedding. She asked you to pay attention to the time and not work too late. Got it. Li Amping nodded. He naturally knew the reason behind Anna's actions. This wasn't the first time he had been reminded. Although he himself didn't need this kind of reminder, he could completely understand her feelings. As a woman, she would naturally be extremely nervous about her own wedding. Therefore, doing these repetitive things that didn't have much practical use was very comforting and calming for Anna and Li Qian. Moreover, as the one being reminded, Li Amping could also feel a hint of warmth that represented happiness. Chapter 414. In the palace, Li Amping sat in the study room. The construction of the gamma ray cannon's main body had been completed. Therefore, he had returned to the palace and completed the remaining details through the long-distance command of the nanobugs. At the same time, he turned more of his attention to another task. Streams of light flashed past his eyes from time to time. His entire attention was attracted by the data in his mind. When he had devoured Dionysus, he had downloaded Dionysus memories, just like what Hygram, the clone Shang Tian, and the Red Queen had done. However, unlike the other people's memories, although Dionysus' memories were larger and more complicated, there was still a part of them that Li Amping could not read. That part was the origin of the dark sky that he had created. This technology could not be found in all of Dionysus' memories. Moreover, its technological level had completely surpassed all of the spells that Dionysus had developed. Li Amping searched through all of Dionysus' memories from when he was young, but there was no data related to the dark sky. The only possibility is in this part of memory that is difficult to decipher. In Dionysus' memory data, there was a part of memory that even Li Amping could not decipher. Logically speaking, this should be impossible. With Li Amping's computational abilities, deciphering a human's memory was not much different from listening to a song. However, in Dionysus' recent memory, there was a part that had turned into pure chaos. Yes, pure chaos. It was like the ravings of a lunatic. It was completely difficult to decipher it using any human language or thinking. To be specific, it was like someone had rolled their head around the keyboard and left a few lines of words on the screen. During this period of time, I've tried 10392448728309 decipher methods, but I still can't decipher this set of chaotic memory data. It's impossible for Dionysus to do this. If he could do this, his abilities wouldn't be limited to what he displayed in battle. Also, the technical details of the Dark Sky's performance are completely different from the Mondo continent. Are there other enemies or races behind him? Li Amping narrowed his eyes. Being unable to decipher the technical data of Dark Sky meant that Li Amping had no way of knowing the origin of Dark Sky. Li Amping couldn't help but frown at the thought of Dionysus' chaos memories. It was something completely different from any encryption algorithm that existed on Earth. It was just like any encryption algorithm would have its own set of rules. For example, it would become B after a series of calculations. Even some algorithms known as chaotic algorithms had their own internal rules. The memory in front of him was like pure gibberish. Li Amping tried all kinds of rules and used his powerful computing power to calculate, but he still couldn't get any meaningful results. However, Li Amping knew that no matter how stupid Dionysus was, his memories could not be garbled. This could only mean that the other party had used a technology that was completely different from the scientific system on Earth. It was an algorithm that had no rules and was in chaos at all times. Early morning, Tianjing, West Warp Center. Olivier slowly walked out of the warp gate. Behind him was Bartok, who was also dressed as a medieval aristocrat. The man was handsome, and the woman was gorgeous. Both of them were wearing clothes that were similar to the medieval period of the Western continent. The moment they appeared outside the warp gate, They attracted the attention of many people. There were even some citizens who took out their mobile phones to take pictures. The two of them looked at the surrounding crowd nervously. They looked at the crowded hall and the buildings that were countless times more magnificent and spacious than the palace castle. They seemed to be at a loss. Just then, a young man dressed in a blue and white uniform walked toward them. He looked at their attire and said, "You're Olivier and Bartok, right?" "Yes, sir. I'm Olivier, and he's Bartok." Olivier, who had beautiful blonde hair, looked like a princess from a certain country. Her voice sounded like she was singing. However, their faces still revealed a hint of restraint that was unique to young people. Wang Ke smiled and said, "It's your first time in Tianjin, right? Catch." After saying that, he threw 2 silver-white rings to Olivier and Bartok. "This is the Mystic Net's login device. I've already entered your identities in advance. I even added some money to your account." Wang Ke asked, "By the way, in your previous training, you introduced how to use the Mystic Net, right?" "Yes." Bartok nodded heavily. His eyes revealed a curious light as he looked at the ring in his hand. Then he slowly put the ring on his index finger. The Mystic Net is the most basic facility in the Heaven Realm. It's used for transactions, teleportation, and identification. Bartok recited the introduction to the Mystic Net in the training class. He and Olivier were the representatives selected from the Mondo continent to participate in Li Anping's wedding. Originally, Wang Ke was the adjutant of the left faction. It was impossible for him to personally participate in this kind of reception work. However, he had been staying in Tianjin to help the left faction. Therefore, he didn't participate in the war in the Magic Continent. He was very curious about the people and things over there, so he personally took a day to come over. "Then follow me." Wang could turn around and led the two of them to another warp hall. Olivier and her companions followed behind somewhat cautiously. From passing through the portal, through the space station, to using the warp gate to teleport to Tianjin from the moon base, whether it was a spaceship larger than a castle, a huge weapon made of metal, or a space station that always floated in the sky, everything she saw and heard along the way completely subverted her worldview. At this moment, Wang Ke suddenly turned his head and asked, "Oh, by the way, you haven't eaten breakfast yet, right?" Without waiting for the two of them to answer, he turned the other way and said, "Then let's go. I'll take you to breakfast first." Wang Ke took the two of them into a restaurant in the Warp Center. In a place like the Warp Center, people come and go every day. Naturally, it is an excellent location. The people who come and go also need to eat, drink, and daily necessities. So many corridors here are rented out as restaurants or supermarkets. Wang Ke walked to a screen and clicked on the screen while saying, "Just choose what to eat on this screen. When you choose to pay, just let him take a picture and the ring will automatically deduct the money." After that, Wang Ke clicked on the name of a noodle, and then the introduction of the noodle screen popped up. He clicked on the purchase directly, and then put the ring in the scanning port on the left of the screen and scanned it. Since the emergence of the mysterious net and began to help humans control the warp gate and other household appliances, in the past month, the mysterious net has been gradually opening the function of connecting to the bank. Everyone can use the mysterious net to replace bank cards, credit cards, and cash. The mysterious net has become the most new and efficient way to pay. Whether it's to buy something through the warp gate, restaurant, or entertainment place, you just need to scan the ring when paying. If you want to give money to others, or if the other party uses the ring to collect money, you just need to touch the 2 rings, and the money will be transferred to the other party through your consciousness. As for security, Li Anping personally monitors every corner of the mysterious net, so there is no security problem at all. Ever since the mysterious net introduced electronic money, because of the credit of Li Anping and the Earth's government, the use of cash in the entire human society has gradually decreased. By the way, other than dictation, you can read, right? Olivier nodded. We learned some common words. Wang Ke pointed to a row of screens and said, "I've deposited 20,000 in each of your accounts. You can use it yourselves. I'll go to the seats and wait for you." Then Olivier and Bartok walked to the screens and chose their food. Then they sat next to Wang Ke's seat and waited for the food delivery robot to deliver the food they had ordered. Wonka slurped down the noodles while briefly explaining the situation on Earth to Olivier and Bartok. Fast food restaurants like this pursue quality, cheap, and speed. The food is all synthesized in advance. There isn't a single real person in the restaurant, and the taste is very ordinary. Olivier ate a few mouthfuls of the pork chop and omelet rice he had ordered. He felt that the food here was 100 times more delicious than the food on the Mundo continent. But in Wang Ku's mouth, it was just ordinary. Bartok, who was at the side, had a similar feeling. In particular, he felt that the ordering and delivery method here was extremely novel and interesting. He found it hard to imagine that the food here was synthesized by machines. Wang Ku continued, "When I have time, I'll bring you to a real restaurant to eat. There will be real people serving you and real chefs. It will be much better than these synthesized fast food." Sigh, but now that everyone is rich, there are more people who play all day. There are fewer people who are willing to work hard. There are also fewer restaurants than before. The original food stalls can't be seen anymore. Wonka was talking about a problem that was currently occurring in human society. Due to excessive production, all humans could live happily even if they did not work for the rest of their lives. They did not have to worry about food and clothing. The speed of human mental progress could not keep up with the rapid technological changes. This resulted in a large number of shut-in men and women staying at home all day, eating synthesized food, playing games, and surfing the internet. This was because Li Onping provided free medical treatment in the hospital with nanomites, which allowed them to never have to worry about their health. The only thing they needed to do was to take 15 minutes to open the warp gate at home when they were halfway through playing games, teleport to the hospital, and walk around the nanomites before returning to continue playing. However, some people could not even be bothered to do such a thing. They would rather apply for remote treatment online and wait for a few hours or a few days. This situation also attracted the attention of Li Onping and the Earth's government. Li Onping's plan was to bring forward the progress of the mystic web's opening. While accelerating the development of society, he would also give the people of Earth more goals and choices. The information regarding the White Land had also gradually changed from small news and urban rumors to detailed exposés. Li Onping had already decided that after the new year, which was a period of time after the mystic web was completely opened, he would announce the news about the demons to all the humans on Earth. Chapter 4:15. After breakfast, Wonka brought the two of them to a nearby clothing store to buy some clothes. It was also a clothing store that did not have any salespeople. Once they entered the changing room, they could choose all kinds of clothes. There was also a machine in the changing room that spat out the clothes for the customers to try on. As soon as Olivier entered the changing room, she heard a female electronic voice. "Dear customer, hello. We are now performing body measurements. Please do not move around to avoid errors." If Olivier had not been taught about Earth's general knowledge in the Mondo continent, she would have thought that there was a woman speaking here. She would have worried that someone was hiding somewhere and peeking at her changing clothes. But now, Olivier no longer had such thoughts. She knew that the voice must have been stored using some kind of technology. So, she followed the female voice's instructions and stood there without moving. Soon, a few green rays of light scanned her body repeatedly. In the blink of an eye, her body measurements were displayed on the electronic screen in front of her. Then, the scene changed. Countless pictures of various clothing appeared on the screen for Olivier to choose from. Olivier's eyes lit up when he saw the dazzling array of clothing that he had never seen before. Some were gorgeous, some were dignified, and some were sexy. There were many more clothes here than in the Mondo continent in terms of material and style. Half an hour later, Bartok had already changed into a t-shirt and jeans. He sat at the entrance of the store with Wang Ku and waited for Olivier, who was still trying on clothes. While waiting, he said to Wang Ku apologetically, "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't expect Olivier to take so long. I made you wait. Do you want me to hurry him up?" "It's fine. Wait for a beautiful girl. I don't mind." Wang Ku looked at Bartok. The young man in front of him could be considered an outstanding young man in both appearance and manner of speaking. However, each and every one of his actions carried a hint of flattery towards him. Thinking about it, this could not be helped. The difference between Earth and Mondo was too great. Not to mention that Earth had already colonized the entire Manastar. There was a huge gap between the two in terms of military strength. There was also a huge gap in technology, culture, education, and living standards. Even if Bartok didn't show it, the inferiority in his heart would always affect his behavior. Wonka smiled and said, "I'm already relaxed and lazy today. His Majesty's wedding is the day after tomorrow. If I still work today, I'm afraid I won't even be able to eat." Bartok said cautiously, "Your Majesty's wedding must be very big, right?" To the people of Mondo continent, Earth was the world of gods, and Lianping was the king of gods. If Wang Ke hadn't taken the lead, he wouldn't have talked about Lianping in front of Wang Ke. Of course, Wang Ke said, "There's no need to mention the global broadcast. All kinds of fireworks and fireworks are piled up in the entire warehouse. The tickets for the wedding are priced at 500,000 yuan each." Wedding tickets? Can this kind of thing still be bought and sold? Bartok said with some difficulty. In his heart, wasn't this kind of behavior a blasphemy to Lianping? The seats in the auditorium are limited, and there are 100 empty seats randomly distributed to the commoners. These 100 seats can be bought and sold. Actually, I think His Majesty won't mind even if the seats of the higher-ups are sold. But so far, no one has done that. Wang Ke smiled and shook his head. "You just came to Earth and aren't used to it. You'll know in the future." Speaking of this, a strange expression appeared on his face, and he said, "Oh right, your seat can also be sold. 500,000 yuan can buy a lot of things for you to bring back. As for the wedding content, you can watch it live in your room." Bartok quickly shook his head in fear. "How can I do that? Even swords can't force me to do such a blasphemous thing to His Majesty." Wonka looked at Bartok, who was shocked by his joke, and laughed. At this moment, Olivier walked out of the changing room. She had changed into a long white dress, which accentuated her beauty, making her look as beautiful as a lily. Seeing Wang Ku and Bartok sitting there, Olivier said with a red face, "Sorry for making you wait." If she didn't know that there were two people waiting outside, she probably couldn't help but try on more than 10 sets of clothes. "It's okay. You look pretty in this dress." Next, Wang Ku brought two people to buy a cell phone. Then, they went to the hotel they had booked in advance. In just a few hours, the two men and woman from the Middle Ages looked no different from modern people in terms of appearance. 11 p.m. in the hotel. Olivier and Bartok each had a room. Olivier jumped onto the bed and sank into the soft bed she had never felt before. She liked everything on Earth so much. Even the toilet in the hotel room looked cleaner than the Palace of Mundo. She really wished that she was a magician. That way, she could stay in a magic school to study. She could always enjoy modern life on Earth. Olivier, who was lying on the bed, suddenly felt a sense of drowsiness in her heart. In the next moment, her mind relaxed, and she fell into a deep sleep. After Olivier fell asleep, a green light slowly emerged from between her eyebrows. It was like some kind of green crystal was slowly extending. These green crystals constantly multiplied in the air at high speed and finally completely separated from Olivier's body. They constantly combined and pieced together in front of the hotel bed and finally turned into the appearance of a man. The man hummed an unknown tune as he sat on the sofa. He snapped his fingers, and the hot water bottle and instant coffee on the table began to rise into the air. The wall-mounted TV on the wall also turned on by itself and began to change channels. When the TV jumped to a variety show, the 2 cups of coffee were placed on the table in front of the sofa. The man looked at the variety show on the TV and laughed loudly. However, the strange thing was that no matter how loud he laughed, Olivier, who was lying on the bed, did not seem to hear him and fell into a deep sleep. After more than 2 minutes, there were rustling sounds in the air around the young man. Countless tiny particles kept on combining. There were nanomites that were everywhere in the air. They combined with each other and turned into countless pieces of metal in front of the man. Then these pieces of metal combined with each other and turned into human bodies. Finally, they turned into Li Onping's appearance. Li Onping sat in front of the man and sized him up carefully. He asked directly, "You were the one who provided the weapon that Dionysus built?" "Oh, aren't you going to ask who I am?" The man smiled. "I was indeed the one who provided the dark sky to Dionysus. It's just that I didn't expect him to be even more foolish than I thought. He actually failed in such a situation. But it doesn't matter. It's this unpredictable and chaotic nature of the human heart that makes me unable to put it down." The man then picked up the cup of coffee in front of him and drank it. He said slowly, "Earlier, your little pet used a total of over 200 methods to scan my body. Are there any results?" Li Onping frowned, and a cold gleam flashed in his eyes. Seeing him like this, the man said, "Don't be nervous. I'm not here to put on a show of force or to fight with you. If that's the case, why would I need to sneak up to Earth?" Li Onping narrowed his eyes and did not say a word. When a man had first appeared in the hotel room, Li Onping had already discovered him through the nanomites. However, when he continued to use various probing means, this man had greatly exceeded Li Onping's expectations. The other party was like a chaotic singularity that appeared before the Big Bang. Regardless of whether it was time or space, they were unable to leave the slightest trace on him. He also seemed to have blended matter and energy into a ball. He was simply like an extremely dangerous barrel of gunpowder. Furthermore, this was Earth. It was because of this that Fang Xingjian chose to have a conversation instead of starting a battle, capturing or dissecting the man. Thinking of this, Li Onping secretly decided to strengthen Earth's defense system once again to prevent such a situation from happening. "Let me introduce myself. I'm called Chaos Tide, a demonic god from the land of White." Sensing Li Onping's murderous aura, Chaos Tide added, "But I'm not interested in battles or destruction at all." Li Onping said coldly, "Then what is your objective for coming to Earth?" "It's nothing. I'm here to help you." "Help me?" "Just like how I helped Dionysus, I'm spreading the seeds of chaos in the multivariate universe. Compared to the stronger side, I prefer to help the weaker side." Chaos Tide broke into a mysterious smile. "The land of White has been peaceful for too long. I don't like such a situation. If some influences that can go against demons or even demonic gods appear, then the entire multivariate universe will become even more chaotic." Hearing the other party's reply, Li Onping was stunned. If what he said is the truth, then this guy is a typical pervert, harming others without benefiting himself. He's a super *T stirrer. Seeing Li Onping's expressionless face, Chaos Tide shrugged. "I can give you a clear piece of information. An evil god tribe's warrior with a high level of 8 energy level will arrive at the World Crossing Gate 8 months later. It shouldn't be a problem for you to kill him. However, after killing him, Earth will really attract Red's attention. The evil god tribe isn't so easy to deal with." Chaos Tide took another sip of coffee and continued, "Let's talk about Red first. Although this guy isn't the one with the strongest battle prowess among us, he is the one who has the greatest desire to pursue the ultimate goal. He is also the one with the strongest desire to pursue Tao. He has spent most of his life in seclusion." After saying this, Chaos Tide let out a sigh and said with a compassionate expression, "Once he's released to fight you, the consequences will be unpredictable." Chapter 416. Red refers to the Red River King. Li Onping asked calmly, "What are his abilities?" "That's right. It's the Red River King." The Chaos Tide nodded and continued, "Didn't you kill Hygram?" The abilities of the evil god tribe are all about the same, and so is Red. It's just that his strength has reached an unbelievable level. As a superior race that grew up in the White Land, all the members of the evil god tribe walk on the path of pure materialism. And Red is someone who has reached the extreme in this aspect. I estimate that with his powers, if he doesn't restrain himself when he walks out from the Realm Transmigration Gate, his existence alone will be enough to destroy a large half of the Milky Way. That would be a disaster for all the humans on Earth. Hearing the Chaos Tide's words, Li Onping's pupils contracted slightly. He had no way to determine if what the Chaos Tide said was true or false. However, based on the information he kept on gathering from the Chaos Tide, it was very likely that this was true. The demonic god's powers were probably much stronger than he had imagined. This means that we can't let him pass through the realm transmigration gate, right? This isn't simple. The Tide of Chaos chuckled. As I said, Red's desire to pursue Tao is very strong. Even if he notices that Earth has killed level 7 and level 8 demons in succession, he will only pay attention to this side and will not really make a move. He'll only send out the evil God Tribe's army to completely occupy or even destroy this universe that Earth is in. If you guys can't win against the evil God Tribe's army, then everything will be for naught. However, if you guys can wipe out the other party's army, then it'll depend on the strength you guys display. The stronger you are, the earlier Red will personally take action. Therefore, if I were you guys, I'd slowly drag things out with the evil God Tribe, continuously exchanging space for time. After hearing the Chaos Tide's information, Li Onping did not say anything. The Chaos Tide did not seem to be anxious either. He merely watched the entertainment programs being broadcasted on the television like an ordinary person, occasionally laughing out loud. Ha! Out of all the television programs, I like such variety shows the most. Humans' hypocrisy, stupidity, greed, and chaos are all vividly displayed in them. Li Onping casually glanced at the TV screen on the wall. He saw the screen click and turn off on its own. The Tide of Chaos said helplessly, "Why did you turn off the TV? You stopped watching halfway through the program. It's like reading a comic without seeing the ending, leaving halfway through a movie and finding out that a woman is on her period before sleeping with her. Don't you feel uncomfortable doing such boring things? The one in front of me right now isn't your true body, right?" Li Onping did not pay any heed to the other party's nonsensical ramblings. He merely looked coldly at the Tide of Chaos and said, "On account of the fact that you've provided me with information, I won't chop off your claw if you leave now." "Oh." The Tide of Chaos raised its eyebrows and said thoughtfully, "Aren't you worried at all?" 8 months later, the evil god race and a demonic god whose strength far surpasses yours will be paying attention to this place. If you're not careful, it won't be just Earth. Even the universe you're in will encounter an unprecedented crisis, ushering in a true doomsday. You may be able to survive, but there is no chance that the people on Earth will survive. Why should I believe you?" Just then, Li Onping finished his analysis of the Tide of Chaos before him. With a flash of white light, Li Onping's true body appeared before the Tide of Chaos. "Haha, you're even tougher than I imagined." Thinking of this, the Tide of Chaos waved its hand, and a disc appeared before Li Onping. "There are 3 things in here. The detailed information of that level 8 evil god race warrior who has rushed over. He'll be able to verify what I said. There's also great dark skies technical information and background. Lastly, there's also a small gift from me for you." Seeing Li Onping take the disc, the Tide of Chaos smiled. "Actually, there's a way for you to not have to go against Red at all. You only have a conflict with the evil god race and not offend all the demons. Therefore, you only need to join the alliance of the other 2 demonic gods. You have Black's aura to begin with, so you can completely integrate into the demon's world. Moreover, they've recently been attacking a world with a very high level and need the strongest warriors to help them in the battle. 8 months later, if you can defeat that level 8 evil god race warrior, you'll prove your worth. I'll then introduce you to them. With them as your protection, the universe where Earth is located will completely become your territory. As long as you compensate the evil god race with some things, Red won't pursue the matter too much. Level 8 demons are definitely no match for me. However, I'm still unable to determine what the essence of demonic gods at level 9 is. However, this lunatic before me isn't invulnerable either. However, I still need time." Li Onping smiled coldly in his heart, but he said, "Aren't you afraid that after I grow up, I'll become a threat to all the demons in the White Land? I've said it before. I like chaos and hate order. The tide of chaos shrugged. The White Land has been peaceful for too long. With demonic, god-level existences, the hierarchy and governance of the entire demon world are so firm that they're like an unchanging neutron star. If you're able to move them, that's what I'm looking forward to. Don't worry, it'll be as you wish. I hope so. The tide of chaos is said nonchalantly, and the tide of chaos gradually faded away and disappeared. His consciousness was shuttling through the endless universe at all times, sowing countless seeds of chaos. Liamping was merely one of them. The tide of chaos had high expectations for this seed, but he did not think that Feng Xingjian would be able to go up against the evil demon race within a short period of time. It would probably take several thousand or even several 10,000 years for the seed to blossom and bear fruit. Of course, there was a higher possibility that the seed would die before it could even germinate. However, Liamping did not say anything when he saw how nonchalant the tide of chaos was. Right now, the demonic, god-level existences might not be able to kill him, but in terms of abilities, they were probably above him. However, Liamping's abilities had been increasing rapidly. He was confident that it would not be long before he would be able to grasp demonic god-level powers, or even surpass demonic gods at level 9. At the thought of this, a hint of hesitation flashed in Liamping's gaze. However, this hint of hesitation disappeared very quickly. Feng Xingjian once again turned into a stream of light and disappeared from the hotel room. As for the moved kettle and coffee cup in the room, they were all restored to their original positions by the nanoworms. It was as if nothing had happened at all. Chapter 417. Just as Liamping and the tide of chaos ended their conversation, on a planet that was countless light years away from Earth, hundreds of huge space battleships surrounded the entire planet. They kept on releasing colorful flames toward the surface of the planet, causing waves after waves of huge explosions. On the surface, countless armored vehicles, interstellar infantrymen, and space mechas launched wave after wave of attacks toward the enemy with the support of the battleship's cannons. Their enemies were alien life forms that looked like bugs that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Bugs that were the size of a bull's head and had 4 limbs on the ground like hunting dogs swarmed toward them. Thousands upon thousands of their companions were torn into pieces by the cannons every second. However, very quickly, even more bugs stepped on the corpses of their companions and charged toward the human soldiers, drowning them completely. A beetle the size of a truck crawled out from the ground and overturned the humans' armored vehicles, crushing the surrounding infantrymen into meat paste. However, it was immediately blasted into pieces by the cannon fire from the spaceship outside the atmosphere. However, more than 10 huge beetles crawled out from the vicinity. Their tough shells made ordinary light beams and particle weapons ineffective against them. Moreover, the plasma flames that they spat out could easily melt the armored vehicles and interstellar infantrymen's armor. Just as this human army was about to be completely wiped out, in the sky, hundreds of space fighters sent out by the humans tore through the air. The dense carpet bombing instantly covered the entire land. The high temperature directly turned the surface into a state of crystallization. The bugs that had covered the entire ground had also disappeared in this round of bombing. We've wiped out at least 1 million of them. Don't let your guard down. Let's go to District 823 to provide support. The bunker there has been surrounded by over 20 million hound bugs. Damn it, it's the white dragons. The entire sky was covered by countless shadows. Thousands of white monsters with 4 wings and bodies that looked like caterpillars surrounded the space fighters. They spat out thousands of parasites from the mouth parts at the bottom of their bodies. These parasites had sharp carapaces and could release lethal toxins and radioactive substances. They could easily pierce through the armor of the space fighters and destroy the engines of the space fighters. In just one volley, more than 80% of the space fighters were destroyed. Go! 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 Use ground mode. We can't fight them in the air. Escape to the tunnel dug by the armored bugs. In the midst of a large explosion, The remaining 5 fighter jets crashed into the ground. As they fell, they transformed into mecha warriors more than 2 meters tall. Then, one after another, they burrowed into the tunnel that the Zergs had dug out. Countless white dragons spat out parasites in the sky to chase after them. But in the end, 3 mechas drilled into the ground. These creatures, which were called white dragons, were obviously unable to pursue the creatures below the surface. They could only let out a series of angry roars and rush to another battlefield. "They're gone," said the pilot in the mech. "It's too dangerous underground. Let's go back quickly." "No," another person said. "The white dragon's compound eyes can see things tens of kilometers away. We'll be in trouble if they discover us." The underground space here had been cleared by high-energy explosives, so there shouldn't be any bugs left. "We'll follow the tunnel 20 kilometers to the west and find a way back to the mothership." "Damn it, I really want to use the Star Destroyer cannon to roast these insects." "It's useless. Pure high temperature or a vacuum environment can't kill them completely. They'll only be carried away by countless meteorites. We have to find the Queen to end this war." The 3 of them advanced along the tunnel in silence. They were pessimistic about the outcome of this war. These insectoids that came out of nowhere crushed the humans as soon as they appeared. In a short span of 50 cosmic years, the insectoids had already covered hundreds of planets within tens of thousands of light years. The Alliance Army's ground forces had no advantage against these endless Zergs. The only time they used a planet destroyer to directly destroy an entire planet, it caused an even greater disaster. The Zergs disguised themselves as meteorites and spread in all directions. The existing detectors of the humans were useless against them. The victory of one planet led to the destruction of more than 10 resource planets. From then on, the human fleet began to fight steadily, using the method of killing the Zergs one planet after another. However, even with the support of space battleships, the ground forces were still no match for the Zergs. After discovering the tactics of the humans, a type of Zerg that could eject photon streams from their tails appeared. The space fleet had lost tens of thousands of battleships because of this. For the next 2 hours or so, the 3 of them piloted their mecha through the underground tunnels, killing small groups of bugs from time to time. Just as they were about to reach their destination, a series of violent tremors came from all directions. "It's the Zergs! Run!" The 3 mechas rushed to the ground at the same time. However, the moment the upper body of the last mecha drilled out, 4 or 5 tentacles broke out from the ground and wrapped around his body. Blue electric light was released from the tentacles, and the mecha was dragged back into the ground without any resistance. Damn it! With a curse, the remaining 2 pilots had completed their transformation. They turned into fighter jets and rushed into the sky. However, before they could fly more than 100 meters, a photon stream pierced through the sky and turned one of the fighter jets into a huge fireball. The last pilot let out a roar. All the small missiles in the fuselage were shot out from his wings, drowning the hound Zergs around the ground. When he wanted to attack again, another photon stream pierced his left wing. This time, the photon stream seemed to be deliberately controlled. It only broke a small hole in the left wing of his fighter jet. The fighter jet had no choice but to turn back into a mecha and land on the ground. The pilot had just completed the forced landing when he saw the hound Zergs swarming around him. He let out a roar and controlled the high-energy particle gun in his hand to start firing back. Unfortunately, the missiles and explosives he brought with him had been used up in the previous bombing operation in battle. The only high-energy particle gun he had left was also exhausted after killing more than 500 hound Zergs. Pulling out the high-frequency dagger from the side of the mecha's leg, Reinhardt's heart was filled with despair. Am I going to die here? Just when he thought he was going to die, the swarm of Zergs stopped around the mecha. Under Reinhardt's puzzled gaze, a giant Zerg that was more than 5 meters tall and more than 12 meters long had already grabbed onto the mecha and dragged Reinhardt into the distance. What were they trying to do? Seeing that the swarm of Zergs had no intention of killing him, Reinhardt quickly turned on his communicator. However, he realized that he could not contact the mothership at all. They blocked my signal. Just when Reinhardt was puzzled and nervous, the swarm of Zergs escorted the mecha to the depths of the ground, into a huge cave. Several hound Zergs climbed onto the mecha and bit open the cockpit door. Under their pushing and dragging, Reinhardt had no choice but to leave the mecha and continue to follow them into the depths of the cave. After passing through a long corridor that was several kilometers long, Reinhardt looked at the scene in front of him in shock. Tens of thousands of hound Zergs appeared before his eyes. In the middle of them, there were 12 Zergs that were completely black and stood still like rocks. These Zergs were named tyrants by the human military. They were currently the strongest Zerg troop type known to mankind. Not only could they break through the atmosphere and fight in space, but they had also defeated the Allied forces' ace mecha troops in several battles between humans and Zergs, indirectly causing the Allied forces to collapse. Reinhardt never thought that he would see such a super dangerous life form with his own eyes, let alone in such a situation where he was unarmed. However, if the appearance of the tyrants only shocked Reinhardt, then the giant Zerg that appeared among the 12 tyrants, which was squirming like a mountain of flesh, almost made Reinhardt's heart stop beating. To be able to have the protection of the tyrants and hide so deep underground. Could this be the Zerg King Zerg that the human general staff had guessed? Just when Reinhardt was in despair, the Zerg King Zerg opened its mouth. More than 10 tentacles extended directly toward Reinhardt and dragged him over. Little Zerg, stop. You already know the information in this human's mind. Call your master here. I have something to talk to her about. However, before the Zerg King Zerg could make its next move, an abrupt voice suddenly rang out from Reinhardt's mouth. The Zerg King Zerg was so frightened that it trembled and threw Reinhardt onto the ground. Chaos Tide, you pervert, scoundrel, the #1 lunatic in the multiverse. Why are you here? A clear, childish voice rang out from the Zerg King Zerg body. However, when it saw Reinhardt, who was floating in the air and emitting bursts of green light, the Zerg King Zerg could not help but tremble. Oh, looks like the game last time has traumatized you. Reinhardt was still unconscious, but the Chaos Tide's voice continued to ring out from his mouth. As long as there's chaos, I'll be there. Do I still need to explain? With a cold snort, beams of light shot out from the Zerg King Zerg's eyes. The next moment, a cold female voice rang out. Ching, if what you're going to say next doesn't pique my interest, I'll directly drag you out of the Chaos Sea and put you into a singularity that hasn't exploded yet. I'll let you know what pain is. Haha, it's been a while since we last met. Your sense of humor has improved. The other party said coldly. I'm not joking. The Chaos Tide smiled awkwardly and said, I know that your powers are too strong. Just a telepathic communication will cause the possessed Zerg King Zerg to temporarily lose part of its abilities. However, the reason I'm here is because I've found a warrior who can help you and Huang to attack the White Universe. Oh, seeing that his words had caught the other party's attention, the Chaos Tide continued. He has inherited a part of Black's abilities. It won't be long before he kills a level 8 warrior from the evil god tribe. Then his powers will be infinitely close to the demonic god level. I think this battle prowess is enough for him to join you and the Huang organization's vanguard. Go on. The Chaos Tide smiled and said, however, he's a native of this universe. If you want him to work for you willingly, why don't you just give this universe to him? After all, I see that you've only sent out one Zerg King Zerg to attack this place. This war is just an after-dinner game for you, right? Giving up a boring game in exchange for a powerful warrior. This is a very cost-effective plan. When the other party heard this, he snorted coldly. You think that you can definitely convince me, so you're talking to me through the Zerg King Zerg. Even if I don't agree, the war in this universe will be delayed because of the Zerg King Zerg's weakening? Haha. I feel that those human cosmic troops will let down their guard against your pets because of their successive victories and once again fall into internal strife. This way, even if you don't agree to this plan, after the Zerg King Zerg recovers, it'll be easier for you to conquer this universe. Unnecessary schemes. The sea of bugs doesn't need to use their brains. They only need to drown everything with absolute numbers. Numbers are the key to determining victory and defeat. MMM. The Chaos Tide nodded perfunctorily and asked again, "So you agree? Bring the warrior you speak of to me within one stellar cycle of this planet. During this period of time, I'll stop invading this universe." A wise choice, the Chaos Tide added. "However, there's one more thing that I've come to see you through this human. Why don't you let me control this human's body and kill this Zerg King Zerg? If you want to attack this universe, you can just send a few hundred Zerg King Zerg next time." Ching, don't push your luck. The Zerg King Zerg's body trembled. It was obvious that it was angry at the Chaos Tide's words. "I know humans very well. Once they find out that the Zerg King Zerg has been eliminated, the loose alliance will immediately collapse. The next time your army comes to this universe, the war will be hopelessly disadvantageous for them. Also, don't you think that the war between Zerg and humans is not beautiful? Only the war between humans, the madness, hypocrisy, and cunning of the soul is exciting. It's much more fun than your Zerg King Zerg, who doesn't even have self-awareness. Chaos Tide, you want me to stop this game, but you started your own game. Has anyone ever told you that you're a pervert among perverts?" The Tide of Chaos said solemnly, "No, I'm just a gentleman who loves art." The next moment, amidst the Zerg King Zerg's crisp screams, the Zerg King Zerg, whose combat power was comparable to Hygrim's or even Dionysus, was torn to pieces by Reinhardt, who was controlled by the Chaos Tide. The purplish-red blood stained Reinhardt. The moment the Zerg King Zerg died, the Zerg swarms on the hundreds of planets immediately stopped as if they had lost their consciousness. They were turned into ashes by the humans' cannon fire without any resistance. A few hours later, the corpses of Reinhardt and the Zerg King Zerg were discovered by the human alliance. He would become a superhero in countless star clusters, known as the strongest man in the universe, and receive the support of countless humans. Looking at Reinhardt, who had fallen to the ground, the Chaos Tide revealed a smile. He reached out a finger and pointed at Reinhardt's brain. A consciousness wrapped around the coordinates of the sun and earth, turned into a memory, and stored it in Reinhardt's mind. And now it's getting more interesting. At the next moment, Reinhardt was the only one who was lying on the ground with blood all over his body, accompanied by a series of deep laughter. Around him, there were countless bugs that were standing quietly on the spot without moving at all. Chapter 4:18. An endless sea of bugs descended from the sky. It was not just the land, the sky, or even the outer atmosphere that was engulfed by the densely packed bugs. From the lowest level hound bugs, armor bugs, white dragons, tyrants, and many other bugs that Reinhardt did not even look at. Some of them could create space barriers and pass through wormholes. Some of them were extremely huge and became biological battleships in the universe. Some of them had endless power and could even move planets. The terrifying bug hordes engulfed planets one after another. After engulfing everything on the planet, they would detonate the entire planet. Countless bugs would scatter out into the surrounding universe like meteorites, spreading to other planets like a virus. The humans' cosmic battleships were unable to withstand a single blow from the bug hordes. Regardless of whether it was the gravity cannons, antimatter cannons, or black hole cannons, the number of bugs that the humans could kill could not compare to the number of bugs that the bug hordes produced every day. No matter how powerful the weapons were, they were completely suppressed by such a terrifying number. Countless planets were destroyed, and the human civilization was plunged into a great crisis. Just as the sea of bugs was about to engulf the entire universe, Reinhardt, who was lying on the hospital bed, suddenly woke up. He looked at the white ceiling and the infusion tube on his arm. Was this a nightmare? Then Reinhardt slowly recalled that he had clearly been captured and brought before the Bug Queen. How did he survive? Could it be that he had been saved by other troops? Just then, countless people dashed into the ward. There were doctors, nurses, officials, and reporters. A few hours later, Reinhardt's mind was still in a state of chaos. The nightmare had ended, and the war had been won. The bug hordes that had troubled the Silver Shadow Empire for over 50 universe years had finally been dealt with. The Empire's expansion once again accelerated. In the following years, countless weak civilizations would be destroyed and conquered. Reinhardt, who had killed the Bug Queen, became the greatest hero. He led the fleet and within a few months, occupied a few planets that were close to the Empire's borders, incorporating them into the Empire's territory. However, the nightmare regarding the bug hordes and how the Bug Queen had mysteriously dyed his hands kept on filling up Reinhardt's mind. Even though he had been promoted and was overjoyed to become a fleet commander, he was still unable to forget that nightmare. It was not just a nightmare. There was also an unfamiliar coordinate that filled up his mind. It was a planet that was several tens of thousands of light years away from the Silver Shadow Empire. Even with the Empire's fastest spaceship, it would still take them 5 to 10 years to reach the planet through continuous hyperdrive. The crew members had to use the hibernation chamber to get through this long journey. This was something that couldn't be helped. The universe was just too big. Without building a Stargate in advance, the first time he wanted to go to a distant place outside the Empire, he could only rely on warp engines and wormholes to slowly fly over at superluminal speed. The time was often calculated in years. The matter with the insectoids definitely won't end so easily. Reinhardt did not know why, but he had always believed in this point. Perhaps the answer was on that distant planet. A few months later, one of the Empire's newest space battleships was sent to the distant solar system. They carried the orders of the Empire's hero, Reinhardt, to explore the wild world that was far away from the borders of the Empire. "Sir, do we have the right to colonize? What I mean is, if we encounter the local indigenous civilization, can we do the same as the other fleets?" "Yes. According to the Empire's usual practice, inform the committee first and then conquer them. As the conquerors, you'll be able to enjoy 3% of the planet's income for the first 10 years. Remember, to different civilizations, there are only enemies and no friends in the universe." After Li Anping ended his conversation with the Chaos Tide, he sat down in the study room alone. It was true that the demonic god-level powers were a great threat, especially to Earth civilization. While he was sitting in the room, countless nanobugs were activated in all corners of Earth, accelerating the construction of the other few superweapons on Earth. But it's still not enough. A demonic god-level power isn't something that a planet's resources can go up against. Even with me around, the civilization's development will still take too long. It'll be faster if I increase my powers first. But the speed at which I release my powers has already reached a limit. After 8 months, I'll be able to reach 4.29 billion times the current speed. At the same time, Li Anping kept reviewing the scanned information regarding the Chaos Tide, as well as Hygrim's vague memories regarding the demonic god level. He gradually pieced together the relevant parts. Compared to the information and suggestions he had brought, the information regarding the appearance of the Chaos Tide this time around was more important to Li Anping. Based on the comparison between the two pieces of information, Li Anping guessed that the so-called demonic god-level beings were the same as him in terms of power. They could grow without limit, and due to their near-limitless lifespan, each of their powers had accumulated to an unimaginable level. Secondly, the direction in which each of them evolved and the nature of the powers they grasped were different. For example, Black's ability was to devour, increasing its power by consuming humans. Gray, on the other hand, possessed a massive body and could evolve the entire world with its own body. Li Anping had yet to meet the so-called Red River King. However, based on the memories regarding the evil god tribe in Hygrim's mind, the Red River King should have enraged intent and an extremely powerful body. This was a tribe that evolved by relying on battles and fury. As for the Chaos Tide, Li Anping looked at the palmworm's disk. Other than information regarding the Great Dark Heavens and the Level 8 Evil God Tribe warriors, there was also information regarding a so-called gift. Li Anping, take this as my wedding gift to you. After this sentence, there was an unprecedentedly huge map. It was a map of the White Land. The amount of data it contained was several hundred times more than 10 empires' libraries combined. The size of the entire White Land far exceeded the range that humans could explore. Moreover, this number was still increasing by the day. Just as Li Anping was quietly reading through the map of the White Land within the palace, a black shadow slowly approached Li Anping's location. The shadow was like a chameleon, constantly changing the color of its surroundings. It was unknown whether it was intentional or not, but all sorts of cameras, detectors, and even patrolling Imperial guards avoided its path, allowing it to reach Li Anping's study room unimpeded. Chapter 419. Li Anping sat quietly behind the desk, and the demonic god's data and information kept on circulating in his mind. On the map of the White Land, other than the various terrains and species information, there was also some simple information regarding the demonic gods. Li Anping relied on his astonishing computational abilities to gradually integrate all the information. Right now, the mysterious ninth energy level did not seem to be completely unfathomable. Omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. This is the ultimate realm. This is also the ultimate realm that all the 12 demonic gods, regardless of whether it's the 5 that were banished or the 7 that remain in the White Land, are pursuing. If it's said that the power and knowledge of the demonic gods of the ninth energy level are advancing endlessly with every passing second, and their consciousness or body can transcend countless spaces and time, then it means that their existences are infinitely close to the ultimate realm, but they will never be able to reach it. No matter how much their powers increase, be it 10 times, 10,000 times, or 1,000 times to the power of 10, even if it's a zero that the entire universe can't fill up, or even if mathematics can't accurately calculate it, it's still not truly limitless. It's the same for knowledge and the ability to transcend dimensions. Therefore, the ultimate realm that the demonic gods pursue is to truly pursue the limitless, to truly become omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. No, Li Anping then thought of the information regarding red, gray, and black. Not all demonic gods are able to increase their powers, knowledge, and dimensions without limit. The Red River King is clearly more inclined towards an unlimited increase in power. If that's the case, if strength, knowledge, and dimension respectively represent the 3 indicators of the ninth energy level, then the Red River King, who has broken through the strength barrier, is clearly the weakest of the 12 demonic gods. Meanwhile, the demonic gods who have broken through the strength, knowledge, and dimension barriers at the same time are infinitely close to the ultimate level, making them the strongest batch. At the thought of this, the image of the Chaos Tide's detestable smiling face appeared in Li Anping's mind once again. How many more barriers has this guy broken through? Then, Li Anping thought of himself. Having reached the 3rd stage of the power system he had created, quantum computation, his knowledge and power could already grow infinitely. Clearly, in the demon god level, he was already a demon god who had broken through the power and knowledge barriers. However, because he had only broken through for a short period of time, even though he had limitless computing power, his knowledge and strength were growing every day, the amount he had accumulated might not be comparable to the Red River King, who had only broken through 1 stage. In order to surpass the demon deities who had existed for countless years, it was obviously far from enough to rely on the 3rd stage of quantum computing. Thinking of this, Li Anping once again imagined the 4th stage of his power system, quantum immortality, the universe tree, and the superstring life. If he could step into the 4th stage, although he might not be able to reach the end, he would definitely be able to break through the dimensional barrier. In that case, Li Anping wouldn't have to worry too much about fighting against the demon god. However, Li Anping still couldn't decide which of the 3 paths to choose. Among them, quantum immortality was the fastest and easiest to achieve, but it also had side effects. The future of the superstring life was even more vast, and it also required a huge amount of accumulation. According to Li Anping's estimation, it might take 8 to 10 years. Compared to the current threat of the demon god, time was obviously a little tight. After thinking for a while, Li Onping's eyes suddenly looked at the door of the study. The door opened automatically with his gaze, and a graceful black figure entered his sight. Li Onping didn't need to look to know that it was Xia Yunyan. Do you know what the consequences are if you casually barge into the palace and get caught? Li Onping already knew when Xia Yunyan planned to enter the palace. He was the one who had interfered with the detection machines, cameras, and even the changes in the patrol routes of the Imperial Guards. Hearing Li Onping's words, Xia Yunyan pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Next, the black outer layer of her skin flipped, and the outer layer, which was originally worn as a battle suit, became tight and stuck to her skin. From afar, it looked like a black skin-tight suit. Even though it wasn't transparent, it still exposed all the curves of her body. Her tight buttocks, slender waist, and full breast could even be seen. The tightly wrapped leather clothes even revealed the outline of her lower body. Looking at the soul-stirring naked body of the young lady before him, Li Onping's heart stirred slightly. However, it was clear that Xia Yunyan's face was flushed and her heart was racing. Seeing that Li Onping didn't say anything, she walked up to him step by step and hugged Li Onping's waist, pressing her astonishingly elastic breasts against his chest. "Big brother Li," Xia Yunyan said softly, "I know you're about to get married, but at least tonight, can you let me accompany you?" Li Onping didn't know what to say. He felt that it wasn't very moral to do this, but he also felt that if he directly rejected Xia Yunyan's words, it would hurt her too much. He was able to monitor the entire world at all times, so he naturally knew Xia Yunyan's thoughts and actions on a daily basis. However, before today, he really didn't expect that Xia Yunyan would be so daring. However, Xia Yunyan didn't wait for Li Onping's reply. She glanced at Li Onping strangely, only to realize that he was just looking straight at her. Facing the absent-minded Li Onping, Xia Yunyan thought that he had tacitly agreed. When Li Onping came back to his senses, Xia Yunyan was already squatting in front of him, her entire head moving up and down. Feeling the stimulation from his lower body and the slippery feeling, Li Onping didn't know what to do. Clearly, if he were to push Xia Yunyan away and tell her that he was just distracted, it would put her in an awkward position. His boundless computing power was useless in front of such a simple multiple-choice question. Just as Li Onping was thinking about this question, Xia Yunyan suddenly raised her head, and a shiny thread extended from the corner of her mouth to Li Onping's lower body. She said with a flushed face, "I heard about Claudia's matter, so I specially practiced. Do you like it?" The next moment, her body was directly lifted up by Li Onping and thrown onto the desk. Li Onping's tenfold physical fitness under normal circumstances was fully displayed at this moment. Xia Yunyan also controlled all the black liquid on the surface of her body back into her body. After a few years of training, the originally young girl's body had become sexy and enchanting, especially the pair of beautiful legs that had been trained all year round. They were perfectly round and firm. Li Onping held Xia Yunyan's face and kissed her. Xia Yunyan instinctively struggled at first, but very quickly, the warm male breath filled her entire brain. She couldn't help but stick out her tongue for Li Onping to taste. Li Onping tasted Xia Yunyan's sweet liquid. His left hand held her buttocks and squeezed a few times, and his right hand roughly grabbed her chest, his palm rubbing against that small protrusion. Xia Yunyan's body trembled slightly. The combat power that was usually enough to destroy a city seemed to have disappeared at this moment. She lay weakly on the desk, feeling that her chest was getting hotter and hotter. She suddenly asked a little worriedly, "Is it too small?" Li Onping didn't understand why she would be worried. Xia Yunyan's chest stood up proudly. Although it wasn't particularly full, the gentleness that he grasped with one hand was naturally alluring. Holding that soft mass in his hand, Li Onping immediately thought of Claudia. Xia Yunyan was clearly comparing herself to Claudia. Compared to the Ice Fortress's Saint Queen, Xia Yunyan's chest was clearly smaller. He smiled and said, "Touching it often can promote blood circulation and increase the secretion of estrogen in your body. It'll get bigger." Xia Yunyan blushed and kissed Li Onping once again. She was completely lost under his scorching breath. The next second, the two of them were completely entangled together. The next morning, their battlefield had shifted to Li Onping's bedroom. Xia Yunyun was curled up in Li Onping's arms like a little kitten. Her hands were wrapped around his body, and her breasts were pressed against Li Onping's side. The battle last night had been too intense. Although Li Onping's normal state had only been modified to have 10 times the physical attributes of an ordinary person, his stamina was almost endless. Xia Yunyun had been training all year round. In a battle situation, she also had a strong physical attribute. Furthermore, she was bold to begin with. Furthermore, she had snuck into the palace, and it was also the day before Li Onping's wedding. Therefore, she was even wilder and kept on pandering to Li Onping. Xia Yunyun felt the hardness coming from her lower body. Her brows trembled, and she opened her big eyes to look at Li Onping. She bit her lips and said, "Again?" Li Onping patted Xia Yunyun's head and said, "Forget it. You're going to swell up." "But I can't take this lying down." Xia Yunyun's chest rubbed against Li Onping a few more times. The protruding points gave Li Onping a slippery and stimulating feeling. Xia Yunyun suddenly smiled. "Sister Anna and the others will have a hard time in the future." The two of them exchanged a few more words, and Xia Yunyun felt as if she had melted into Li Onping's embrace. She eventually fell into a deep sleep. In the center of Tianjing's defense array, the doctor was looking at the information before him seriously. Just then, there was a series of light and shadow changes behind him. With the cooperation of countless nano-worms in the air, Li Onping's fully clear image appeared behind the doctor. The doctor did not seem to find this strange at all. He asked directly, "Your Majesty, are you here to see the results?" "Doctor, you seem to be a little too bold. To think that you would dare to use a plan against me." Li Onping's cold words did not seem to affect the doctor at all. He chuckled and said, "Your Majesty, Miss Ya's every move was her own intention. I didn't affect her at all. Influence is everywhere. Television, newspapers, news, magazines, novels. The various kinds of information that humans come into contact with every day can affect a human's concept and judgment. Although you didn't directly tell Xia Yunyun to do this, you've unknowingly affected her judgment by controlling the various kinds of information around her. But Your Majesty, aren't you aware of the entire process that I've done?" The doctor had been helping Li Onping set up the spiritual network and the mystic network, so he naturally knew about the nano-worms that were everywhere on Earth. He smiled and said, "If Your Majesty wishes to stop me, you can stop me at any second. If Your Majesty doesn't wish for anyone to enter the palace, then it's impossible for anyone to enter the palace." Seeing that Li Onping did not say anything, as if he had tacitly agreed with his judgment, the doctor's tone became even more confident. "Your Majesty, I'm sure that you're already aware of my judgment and findings. Ever since you've modified the entire Earth, your biological behaviors have been constantly being reduced. All the psychological tests have shown that your personality is gradually disappearing. When these human emotions completely collapse, I'm afraid that you'll completely become an existence with absolute rationality, losing all human emotions. You've clearly noticed this and want to stop it. Therefore, over the past few months, you've been trying to use various biological behaviors to stimulate yourself and slow down the disappearing of your personality. Although I haven't found the reason why Your Majesty's personality is disappearing, I've discovered one thing. There's an ultimate behavior that you haven't tried yet." The doctor said slowly, "Reproduction." Li Onping sighed. "Reproduction." Seeing that Li Onping had said the same thing at the same time, the doctor became even more excited. "That's right, reproduction. This is the ultimate behavior of all living creatures. It's engraved in their genes and their instincts. It's the only way for them to spread their lives and their existence. Over the past few thousand years, no matter how much society has changed, humans have always revolved around these two words. They've taken in more and more outstanding partners and passed down their genes. This is a human instinct. It's also the instinct of all weak life forms to maintain a population." Hearing the doctor's words, Li Onping said calmly, Do you know that if the stimulation yesterday didn't have any effect, you'd be dead right now? The doctor bowed and said respectfully, Your Majesty, you're the greatest life form in the multivariate universe, the most dazzling miracle. It's clearly my honor to sacrifice myself for Your Majesty. The act of reproduction does indeed have the effect of slowing down the collapse of my personality. It stimulated the instincts in my human genes under my normal state, affecting me under my normal state. Although this matter doesn't solve the problem itself, after this night, it changed some of my thoughts, Li Onping said calmly. Doctor, have you heard of the suffering of all living beings? The suffering of all living beings? The doctor ruminated over the words carefully, but he did not know what Li Onping meant. I've already made my decision regarding the path that we should take next. Li Onping said expressionlessly, We'll also have to change our strategy regarding Earth slightly. The doctor's body trembled. He knew that the entire Earth would once again go through a huge change because of Li Onping's decision. Chapter 420. Looking at the doctor, Li Onping suddenly smiled mysteriously. Take it as a small punishment for you. I'll let you see the world that I see. At the next moment, before the doctor could react or dodge, Li Onping tapped his finger on the doctor's forehead. Boom! The doctor felt as if his brain was going to explode in an instant. Countless pieces of information were forced into his brain, and countless images kept on flowing before him. All sorts of lives kept on flashing past his mind. There were all sorts of people, all sorts of thoughts, and all sorts of desires. Many of these thoughts and desires were contradictory to each other, and this made the doctor feel as if his head was going to explode. The spiritual force field and nanobugs that had spread across the entire world allowed Li Onping to understand the entire situation on Earth. Moreover, it was not just the external situation. Even everyone's spiritual world was no longer a secret before Li Onping. Humans' emotions were no longer a secret before Li Onping. Therefore, countless actions, lives, and thoughts kept on flashing through his mind. If Li Onping were a supercomputer, then he would only be processing this massive amount of spiritual data. However, Li Onping was a human with human emotions. In order to manage the entire Earth and human society, he kept on receiving, reading, and experiencing these spiritual data. It was as if he was living every single human's life at the same time. There had been such a story in the past. In the story, it was said that in order to guide a mortal to become an immortal would let the mortal sleep and start dreaming. In the dream, the mortal would experience several tens or hundreds of reincarnations. After waking up from the dream, the mortal would see through the mortal world and be determined to pursue Tao. If this was the case after several tens or hundreds of reincarnations, then what would it be like to receive the spiritual data of several billion people on Earth at the same time? Seeing through the mortal world, or getting tired of the foolishness of mortals, was an unavoidable feeling. Even with Li Onping's steel-like willpower, he could only slow down this process. He could also prevent the process of his personality breaking down by experiencing his own human behavior. It was like a piece of white paper that had been scribbled on. Through a darker color, the other colors would be covered up. However, this process could only be slowed down and could not be stopped. Once a step had been taken to become a god, there was no turning back. His divinity gradually grew, and his humanity gradually disappeared. Li Onping knew that if this continued, his consciousness algorithm would one day change completely and truly become an artificial intelligence. At that time, he would not make decisions based on joy, but purely for the sake of benefits. In that case, quantum immortality, which also required him to abandon his humanity and become a non-conscious existence, was the only path Li Onping would choose after becoming deified. His body and consciousness would disappear from the human world, becoming a state of superposition. After all the possibilities were superimposed, he would exist in any corner of the universe at the same time. If he wanted to collapse, he would have to observe him. However, in order to observe him, he would have to decipher Li Onping's consciousness algorithm, which was almost impossible. He would become the specter of the entire universe, existing with every particle in the universe, freely changing all the universal constants, curling up on the timeline of the entire universe. Due to the stacking of all possibilities, every choice in the universe would be covered by him. He would split up along with the splitting of the world, communicating with himself in all the parallel worlds. His strength, knowledge, and space-time were growing at an insane rate with every passing second. He would be infinitely close to the ultimate. However, as long as the universe was still operating and the timeline was flowing, there would always be new possibilities. Merely reaching the level of quantum immortality would not be able to reach true infinity. Quantum immortality was actually the easiest path for Li Onping to take to become a demon god. However, his biggest shortcoming, which was to abandon his human emotions, was something that Li Onping could not accept. This was because he knew that after he abandoned his human emotions, the entire Earth would become an insignificant existence to him at that time. He would definitely not care about the life and death of humans. It could be said that even Li Onping would find it difficult to calculate what he would do when he was purely rational. However, what was certain was that he would definitely do a lot of things that were beneficial to him, things that Li Onping hated. The difference between the universe tree and quantum immortality was that it communicated with the power of multiple universes through a portal. Quantum immortality was different worlds in the same universe, while the universe tree communicated with different universes. As for the last superstring life form, it could distort the concept of a lower dimension through the ascension of dimensions to pursue all possibilities. It was just like how humans in the third dimension could create a Mobius strip by curling up a two-dimensional piece of paper and allowing ants to continuously walk on it. This was equivalent to continuously disappearing and appearing in the two-dimensional world. After reaching the eighth dimension, one could distort the seventh dimension to reach different points in time in different timelines in the universe. This meant that there were infinite possibilities in multiple parallel worlds. Only after reaching the 10th dimension could one distort the 9th dimension to reach different points in time in different universes and timelines. This meant that there was infinite infinity. However, this was a process that required the continuous accumulation of power and knowledge. It was unlike quantum immortality, where one could increase with the jump of the universe. Reaching the 10th dimension was almost the ultimate. However, even the current Li Onping was unable to calculate how to reach the 10th dimension. Just then, the doctor opened his tired eyes. It was as if he had been dehydrated, and he said with a dejected expression, "How big is the range of this information?" Li Onping glanced at him and said, "Within 50,000 square meters, 1 day's worth of mental energy data." The doctor let out a deep breath and said, "I feel as if I've experienced the lives of various people, and my self-perception has been confused. It seems that I'll have to look for a psychiatrist. I'll be fine after a nap," Li Onping said, and then his whole person disappeared. In the palace, he had already sat up in his bedroom. "It's time to release humans from the bottle. Let's wait for this wedding to end. This will greatly reduce the speed of my personality collapsing. However, the stimulation of human behavior can continue. It's still very effective." Just then, Claudia walked into the room and saw the messy bed, as well as the white and tender body lying on it, as well as the naked Li Onping. Claudia's head buzzed and exploded. Her face turned red as she looked at the scene in front of her, not knowing what to do. She had come to ask Li Onping to go with her to the wedding venue to take a look. She had communicated with Li Onping beforehand and knew that he was in the bedroom in the palace. However, how would she have known that she would see such a scene? She pointed at the two people on the bed and said, at a loss, You guys." At the next moment, Li Onping waved his hand, and Claudia's clothes were stripped off. Her beautiful body let out a scream as she was summoned onto the bed by Li Onping. A few minutes later, the two bodies were entangled. Claudia also reacted. Was this not the great opportunity she had been waiting for? It was just that she had not expected that Xia Yingyun would beat her to it. She immediately hugged Li Onping tightly, her breast pressed tightly against Li Onping's chest as she catered to him wildly. However, although her figure was more voluptuous than Xia Yingyun's, her physique was not as strong as that of an ability user. Over 10 minutes later, she was covered in sweat, and her skin was slippery as she laid on the bed. She then let out a scream as her legs twitched. She had completely sunk into endless pleasure. Xia Yingyun's eyelashes were trembling, and her body was stiff and motionless. However, Li Onping reached out and grabbed her, who was pretending to be asleep, to join the battle. Chapter 421. The day before Li Onping's wedding, in Tianjing, in a base station of certain spiritual force field near the palace, the screen before Li Onping's eyes kept on changing rapidly. Simultaneously, two streams of green light were emitted from his eyes, and he kept on entering various parameters into the spiritual network. With his current position as the center, the spiritual network that covered an area of 1,000 meters around him was constantly adjusting its parameters, turning the space within 1,000 meters into a testing ground. Due to some modifications to the Mystic Network plan, Li Onping had no choice but to adjust some of the attributes of the spiritual network. Next to him was the Heavenly Queen's clone, who was soaked in liquid. The Heavenly Queen's clone was floating up and down in the glass container. She also opened her eyes and looked in the direction of the data screen. The expression in her eyes was exactly the same as Li Onping's. In the surroundings of the spiritual network base station, streams of electric sparks would occasionally appear in the air. These were the abnormal feedback from the nanomites caused by the adjustments to the parameters. Just as Li Onping was adjusting the spiritual network according to the new plan, the professor's voice rang out. Your Majesty, by adjusting the spiritual network like this, it's true that the process of divinization can be slowed down. However, the universe contains many worlds. If there are other parallel worlds, that's right. Your worries are correct. After hearing the professor's report, Li Onping did not stop working. He continued to say, there are endless possibilities in parallel worlds. When something happens, all the possible outcomes will split into new timelines and give birth to parallel worlds. My choice is the same as well. Therefore, there must be a parallel world in which I entered the stage of quantum immortality right after completing the quantum computation. Then what does Your Majesty think you'll do? The professor said solemnly. According to Your Majesty's considerations, he'll probably infect all the parallel worlds and integrate all the timelines in our universe. You're right. However, the universe itself has endless possibilities. After completing quantum immortality, I'll continue to pursue the universe's infinity. However, as long as he hasn't truly reached the end, there'll definitely be one of the following possible universes. It's a universe that hasn't been infected by me without choosing quantum immortality. The doctor mumbled. In other words, every second, no, not every microsecond or nanosecond, there's a possibility that a new universe will be born under the influence of quantum immortality. Li Onping nodded. He knew that the doctor understood what he meant. If seconds were used as a unit of measurement, it meant that in the first second, Li Onping's current world had split into two. One was a universe infected by quantum immortality, and the other was an intact universe. In the next second, the intact universe turned into a universe that had been infected by quantum immortality and a new, intact universe. Just like splitting, as long as Li Onping had not reached the true ultimate after quantum immortality and embraced true infinity, he would not be able to truly cover all parallel worlds. In other words, there would definitely be a world that was splitting in every second, a world that was always intact. As for why the world that Li Onping and the doctor were currently in was the world that had not been swept up by quantum immortality, the doctor did not raise this question. It was because he was very clear that this was because the dimension he was in made him unable to perceive the changes in the timeline. He could only perceive the space-time he was in now. The premise to raise the above question was that the Doctor was already in such a space-time. To the Doctor, from a subjective point of view, he must exist in a universe that had not been infected by quantum immortality. It was only because of this that he could maintain his current consciousness. His existence was 100% in this universe. It was just like tracing the genealogy of humans. Your father, grandfather, and great-grandfather would continue to trace back. Your ancestors had experienced countless floods and fierce beasts, turmoil of war, starvation and famine. They had survived generation after generation, and it was under a very low probability that you were born. However, if you were to ask why you were born under such a low probability, it would be a meaningless question in itself, because the premise of your question was your own existence. Therefore, after the Doctor received his answer, he did not continue to dwell on this question. He continued, "If that's the case, does the ultimate not exist?" Li Yonping knew why the Doctor asked this question. It was because if the ultimate did exist, then all the multi-worlds and multi-universes would be encompassed by that ultimate. Naturally, there would not be the universe that Li Yonping was in now. However, such a situation did not occur, which meant that the entire multiverse had yet to give birth to a true ultimate. The ultimate state is an impossible possibility. Whether it exists or not, I can't calculate it. Yes, even if Li Yonping's current computing power was claimed to be almost infinite, it was only a claim. Whether it was 2 carat 10,000 times or 2 carat 10 million times, it was just a huge number. It was not truly infinite. A few minutes later, when the Doctor and Li Yonping cut off the communication, Anna had already contacted Li Yonping again. "Your Majesty." Anna's tone was filled with resentment. "You had a lot of fun yesterday, right?" Li Yonping did not hide the fact that he had sex with Xia Yunyun and Claudia. He did not feel the need to hide such a thing. Those servants, guards, and maids could not go around spreading this matter because they did not have the guts to do so. Now, Anna, Li Qian, and Xiao Shuesu all knew about this matter because Claudia had specially shown it off when they were inspecting the wedding venue today. Thinking of Claudia's proud look, Anna was about to explode. For something like this to happen the day before the wedding, it was indeed very difficult for a modern woman like her to have many women serving one husband. Hearing Li Yonping's awkward laughter through the phone, Anna said coldly, "We're almost done here. Come over quickly. We have to take some wedding photos today." "Got it, right?" Anna asked with some anticipation. "Didn't you say that you were going to prepare a diamond ring? Are you ready?" "Oh, a diamond ring. I've already prepared it." Li Yonping answered Anna without skipping a beat or blushing. He pointed with one hand, and the countless oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, and other elements in the air changed their structure under his modification. In the end, they combined together and slowly formed the shape of 4 diamond rings. Don't forget to bring them to the wedding tomorrow." After saying this, Anna was silent for a while. In the end, she did not ask Xia Yunyun any questions. It was as if she had completely ignored this matter and hung up the call. After ending the call, Li Yonping continued to combine the 4 diamond rings in his hand. The 4 diamond rings each had a different streamlined shape. Then, under Li Yonping's adjustments, he changed the types of chemical elements and adjusted the crystal structure of the 4 rings. Under his adjustments, the 4 rings became pink, light green, black, and white respectively. The 4 diamond rings were modified at the same time, combining the styles of the world's famous jewelry designers as well as the preferences of Anna, Li Qian, Xiao Shuesu, and Claudia. After giving it some thought, Li Yonping pointed out once again. High-temperature gas rose in the air, and a blue diamond ring slowly appeared. This was the ring he had prepared for Xia Yunyun. Looking at the 5 beautiful diamond rings, Li Yonping nodded in satisfaction. He did not add any special abilities to the rings because there was no need for it. As long as they were on Earth, the omnipresent nano-worms and spiritual network will be able to reproduce most of the physical phenomena in the universe, as long as Li Yonping gave them sufficient authority. However, this matter was not urgent. Li Yonping would hand it over to them before the new functions of the mystic network were released. After all, with him on Earth, humans would not be in danger. If there were dangers that even he could not fend off, then no one else would be able to do so. After putting away the rings in his hand, Li Onping looked at the Heavenly Queen's clone in the glass container and said calmly, "I'll leave the rest to you." The clone nodded. She was also a part of Li Onping. At the next moment, Li Onping's light form disappeared, leaving behind the Heavenly Queen's clone under his control. He continued to adjust the parameters of the entire mystic network, and he would occasionally conduct tests with the professor. After all, the day when the mystic network would be completely released was getting closer. As a system that would be closely linked to the entire human society, it even had the ability to destroy the entire human society with a single thought. The mystic network could turn the earth into a divine country or hell. Therefore, no matter how carefully Onping and the professor were to treat this system, it would not be overboard. With a flash of white light, Li Onping appeared in the wedding hall. A large group of people immediately came over to greet him. Li Onping did not say anything and headed deeper into the venue. The first person to appear before him was Xiao Xuesu. Out of the four of them, the ones who would not be jealous of Li Onping for having too many wives were probably her and Claudia. After all, one of them was a girl from one of the Desia's 9 great royal families, while the other was the daughter of the Saint King from the Ice Fortress. Their families and their father's generation were polygamous. Furthermore, regardless of whether it was Xiao Xuesu or Claudia, their respect and fear toward Li Onping was definitely greater than their love for him. Xiao Xuesu walked over and walked along the corridor with Li Onping. She would occasionally nod at the servants who were greeting them. At the same time, she stuck close to Li Onping and said, "Your Majesty, yesterday, sigh." Xiao Xuesu let out a sigh. She did not know why Li Onping, who usually did not get close to women, would choose to sleep with other women before the wedding. Furthermore, he had done it with 2 women at once. Faced with such a situation, any woman would be angry. She said helplessly, "Miss Li Qian and Miss Anna are a little angry. You'll have to coax them later." Following that, Li Onping walked over to Li Qian and Anna's side and coaxed them respectively. Although the 2 of them were still very unhappy, they did not show it in front of so many people. On the other hand, Claudia had a proud look on her face. Although she was still limping a little, she continued to hug Li Onping like a koala bear. It was as if she did not want to leave him for even a second. For the rest of the day, Li Onping continued to take wedding photos with Anna, Li Qian, Xiao Xuesu, and Claudia. The 4 women kept changing their dresses and outfits. Fortunately, with the existence of the space warp gate, the speed at which they changed locations was very fast. Furthermore, the 4 of them had already chosen the location where they wanted to take photos with Li Onping. Everything happened very quickly. After taking photos with Anna, Li Qian, Xiao Xuesu, and Claudia in the bamboo forest, the sea of clouds, the snow mountain, and various other places, Li Onping returned to the palace with the 4 of them at the same time and took photos with the 4 of them together. Although the entire process took a lot of time, Li Onping did not show any signs of impatience. After all, he was monitoring all places on Earth. While taking photos, he could also do all kinds of work and deal with all kinds of things. He did not even stop releasing his powers. Chapter 422. On the day of Li Onping's wedding. When Olivier and Bartok walked out of the room, the whole of Tianjing was enveloped in a festive atmosphere. The entire interior of the hotel was covered in a layer of red. There was even a portrait of Li Onping hanging in the hotel lobby. Everyone's faces were filled with excited smiles. Olivier had never seen such a scene in the Mondo continent. In the Mondo continent, even if the king was getting married or even pardoned the entire country, the ordinary people would not be happy or excited about the wedding itself. Walking in the lobby, Bartok looked at the crowd gathered in the distance and asked curiously, "What are they watching?" "I don't know." Olivier looked at the huge screen in front of the crowd and said, "It should be something like the TV news. Let's go up and take a look." Olivier followed behind, and shook her head helplessly. Ever since Bartok came to Earth, it was as if he had returned to his childhood. He was curious about everything here. However, Olivier thought about it again. Ever since he came here, there had been a huge change as well. When he thought about how he would be returning to the backward and primitive Mondo continent in a few days, Olivier's heart was filled with disappointment. While thinking about this, the two squeezed into the crowd and saw what was being broadcasted on the TV screen. It was a few hosts talking as they broadcasted today's wedding. Today's decorations at the main gate of the imperial city were personally directed by the internationally famous ethnic artist Tian Xiaojun. The white peony symbolizes wealth, while the blue rose symbolizes the romance of love. It's a joyous day. As you can see, the first parade has already set off from the main gate of the imperial palace. There the chants from the Codex Nation. Hey, Teacher Wen, we know that His Majesty is using the Xia wedding ceremony this time, but we don't know which dynasty it's from. Oh, the ceremony His Majesty chose this year is based on the opening ceremony of the current dynasty. Olivier was not surprised to see the content on the TV. She had gotten used to watching the TV in her room for the past 2 days. At least 4 out of the 10 channels were discussing the wedding. From the 4 princesses' outfits, wedding gowns, wedding customs, ceremonies, banquets, various invited guests, performances, activities, and interviews with some of the princesses' classmates, friends, and relatives, even she, who had just arrived on Earth a few days ago from the Doman continent, felt very familiar with this wedding. This was unimaginable on the Mondo continent. Even if a king wanted to celebrate with his people, he wouldn't allow his people to report his wedding in detail. Olivier watched for a while more and lost her patience. There were performances, parades, and other activities with representatives from all over the world. They would start at 6 in the morning and continue until 10 in the evening. When the wedding ended, she was not interested in standing here and watching television for a few hours before the wedding officially began. And so, Olivier patted Bartok twice, telling him to leave with him. From tonight onwards, they would be going to the palace hall to participate in the official wedding ceremony. Before that, they were still free to move around. But just as they reached the entrance, before they even crossed the hotel's warp gate, the two of them were shocked by the scene outside. Why are there so many people? Bartok looked at the dense crowd outside the door in disbelief. Their clothes and faces were all printed with the Xia flag. Some people even printed Li Anping's face on their faces, chests, and backs. The doorman at the side said, "I'm sorry, sir. His Majesty and the princesses will pass by our hotel today. I suggest you use the warp gate if you want to go out. However, this is also a very rare opportunity. At 3:12 in the afternoon, His Majesty will pass by our hotel. The two of you will personally see the faces of His Majesty and the 4 princesses." Olivier nodded and did not say anything. Of course, she knew that Li Anping and the princesses would pass by the hotel, but she did not expect so many people to gather here. Usually, because of the popularity of the warp gate on the streets of Tianjin, not a single person could be seen. The scene in front of her was too different from the deserted streets of Tianjin that she had seen in the past 2 days. Although she had heard in the news that the wedding in Tianjin was expected to be held on the same day, there would be more than 8 million tourists from all over the world who would pass through the warp gate. However, no matter how huge the number was, it was obviously not as shocking as seeing the truth with her own eyes. Olivier shook her head. She could not understand the admiration that the people on Earth had for Li Anping. She could only activate the warp gate with Bartok and head to the shopping mall. Today, they planned to go to the mall to buy some gifts for their friends and relatives in Mondo. The two of them walked towards the warp gate. They thought about the address in their hearts and did not make any unnecessary movements. When they stepped through the warp gate, their bodies flashed with blue light, and they disappeared from the hotel entrance. However, after walking around the mall a few times, they had no choice but to give up on buying gifts today. Olivier and Bartok went to several shopping malls, and almost every item was full. Li Anping's wedding caused people from all over the world to rush to Tianjin through the warp gate today. Whether it was to buy clothes, eat, or even go to the toilet, there was a long queue. Looking at the people in front of her who were wearing clothes of different seasons and had different skin colors, Olivier felt that everyone in the world had come to Tianjin today. Of course, that was impossible. Most people on Earth stayed far away and took the time to watch the live broadcast. Of course, because of the time difference in the Western mainland, if they wanted to watch, they could only stay up late to watch the live broadcast. However, because of the sudden increase in the number of people in the past few days, many physical stores had indeed made a lot of money. After all, not everyone would buy things when they came to Tianjin. However, eating and drinking were necessary. In particular, some businesses took the opportunity to provide live streaming services, which made it easier to attract customers. With the huge increase in the number of people, the ones who were under the greatest pressure were the Warp Center and the Tianjin police. In particular, the Warp Center had to temporarily open 100 warp halls to relieve the pressure. Olivier and Bartok felt a little helpless as they looked at the crowd in front of them. They did not want to wait in line for half a day just to buy something. In the end, they decided to go back to the hotel to watch TV and surf the internet. Then, they prepared to attend the wedding ceremony that would begin in the evening. Chapter 423. They returned to the mall's warp gate. Halfway there, Olivier suddenly saw a group of young girls handing out flyers. The reason why these girls caught Olivier's attention was because most of them were blonde. Clearly, they were not natives of the Xia. Moreover, all the people they handed out flyers to avoided them as if they were the plague. A few minutes after Olivier saw them, a group of mall security rushed in, trying to get them to leave the mall. The two sides immediately started arguing. The two of them looked at each other curiously. Bartok even picked up one of the flyers that the girls were handing out and looked at it. Olivier also looked over curiously. She saw that the flyers were all about women having self-respect and self-love, opposing polygamy, and opposing Li Onping's behavior of marrying 4 wives at once. They demanded equality between men and women. After looking at it for a while, Bartok smiled. So these are the feminists. Olivier pursed her lips. Boring. After all, in the Mondo continent, polygamy, or even polygamy, was a very normal thing. It was completely related to the power of the people involved. In her opinion, regardless of whether Li Onping was a man or a woman, with his strength, it was normal for him to have 100 or even 1,000 heterosexual partners. Olivier said casually, "Let's go. There's nothing to see." But His Majesty is really benevolent. If this had happened in the Mondo continent in the past, I'm afraid these opponents would not have been able to escape the fate of being massacred. Bartok nodded and casually tossed the flyers to the ground. On the other side, the girls who were handing out flyers had been chased out of the mall by the security department. That night, Li Onping's wedding officially began. Amidst the blessings of countless people, he completed the final ceremony with Anna, Li Qian, Xiao Xuesu, and Claudia. When Li Onping put on the rings for the 4 of them, everyone cheered. The soaring fireworks lit up the entire night sky of Tianjin. At the same time, under Li Onping's control, countless streams of high-energy charged particles filled the skies of major cities all over the world. The atmospheric molecules in the upper atmosphere were stimulated by this, producing an aurora that constantly changed into radiations and curtains. On this day, the entire sky of Earth turned into a colorful screen of light. Li Onping, Anna, Li Qian, Xiao Xuesu, and Claudia appeared on the big screen. Beneath the stage, Olivier looked at the 4 dazzling consorts on the stage with an envious gaze. He wished he could go up and take their places. In her opinion, becoming Li Onping's wife was equivalent to becoming the wife of God. She would have endless power and wealth, and she would be able to stay on Earth forever. She would be able to enjoy life in this place that was like the heavenly realm. After the wedding on this day, the entire Earth once again entered a state of accelerated development. 2 weeks later, the World #1 Martial Arts Conference, which had been delayed several times, was officially held. If the various special forces, assassins, and athletes that appeared in the ordinary category were already an eye-opener for the ordinary people, then the ability user category was the one that made all humans go crazy. Although Li Onping had previously publicized the existence of ability users, it was still very difficult for ordinary people to see the battle scenes of true ability users. And this time, countless aptitude users launched an intense battle in order to ascend to the top 10. In addition, the World #1 Martial Arts Conference was a project that Li Onping supported, so it received a huge budget and publicity. From the top 32 onwards, the live broadcast of every competition had become the most popular program on Earth. The competition venues ranged from deserts, the bottom of the sea, volcanoes, the moon, Mars, and even some small planets. In addition, there were all kinds of incredible and brilliant abilities, which made all the spectators exclaim in excitement. In order to let the ordinary spectators understand the process of many ability users' battles, the live broadcast of the top 32 competitions invited famous ability users such as Zhuan Mai, Lu Feng, and even Jin Guang to commentate. This allowed all humans on Earth to have a detailed understanding of the 6 major abilities, psychic energy, and energy rank. The final battle of the second ability group was between Jason and Su Xining. One of them was an underground boxer from the Confederate. After entering Academy City, he improved rapidly and became the #1 prodigy of Academy City after Feng Haojia. Due to his mutated ability, known as the Demonic Beast Constitution, he was known as a monster among monsters. On the other hand, Su Xining and a few other ability users secretly received guidance from the Queen of Heaven version of Li Onping, which triggered the ability hidden in their bodies. With the ability of crystal reflection, they successfully fought their way out of a bunch of talented students, martial artists, and family geniuses. Of course, the two of them being able to fight all the way to the final battle had a lot to do with the Xia Dragonfinch, the imaginary mechanism, and the 3 major human armed forces not being able to participate. In short, after more than a month of competition, the two of them finally fought their final battle in the center of the sun, in the arena that Li Onping had personally created called the Sun Palace. Just this arena alone was enough of a gimmick to attract everyone's attention. Moreover, on the day of the final battle, Li Onping would also come to the judging panel to give the winner a reward. In the end, Jason, who had a more solid foundation, won the battle. However, to Li Onping, it didn't matter who the champion was. The key was the influence brought about by the World Martial Arts Conference. From now on, every 4 years, the Sun Palace would put on a spectacular final battle. And because of Li Onping's strong promotion of the first tournament, it caused a wave of martial arts practice on Earth. After all, not everyone was born with an ability, but anyone could practice martial arts. Although practicing secret martial arts might not necessarily lead to an ability, it still couldn't stop a large number of youths and teenagers from becoming passionate. In a seaside villa located in the southern part of the Western land, Xia Yunyun looked at the screen with dissatisfaction as Jason and Su Xining fought intensely. She said unhappily, "If I were up there, I'd have finished off the two of them long ago." Li Onping hugged her from behind, one hand touching Xia Yunyun's soft breast while the other hand was placed on Xia Yunyun's slightly bulging stomach. Feeling the scorching heat coming from her chest, Xia Yunyun smiled and hit Li Onping's hand. However, she couldn't bear to let go. She smiled and said, "Where are you touching?" Li Onping acted as if nothing had happened. He said calmly, "You should rest well since you're pregnant. After all, you'll still have a chance after 4 years." Xia Yunyun nodded gently. She didn't have the same arrogant look as before. She only said worriedly, "How did my stomach become so big in just 2 weeks? I saw that other people's stomachs didn't get bigger even after a month." Li Onping looked at Xia Yunyun's stomach and revealed a hint of a smile. "My son naturally can't be ordinary. His growth speed and absorption of nutrients are different from ordinary people. All right, look at how anxious the MC is." Xia Yunyun pointed at the screen and said, "They're about to finish their fight. You should go to the scene quickly." Li Onping nodded. "Come to the palace for dinner tonight." Before he finished speaking, Li Onping had already turned into a beam of light and disappeared from the room. With the successful conclusion of the first World Martial Arts Tournament, countless parents sent their children to various schools for testing. Those children who were tested to be incapable all caught up with the fanatical trend of martial arts. Based on the research of human historians, countless experts were born during this period of time. 1 month after the World Martial Arts Conference ended, humanity's first sublight speed spaceship was tested successfully, completing the first human landing on Mars in human history. The entire human race ushered in the interstellar era. Under Li Onping's technical support, spaceships continued to undergo technological changes. New versions of spaceships were produced almost every week. This was especially so with the increase in Li Onping's strength. This situation became increasingly obvious. Spaceships, robots, artificial intelligence, and the omnipresent nanoworms allowed humanity to enter a stage of rapid progress. Countless spaceships were sent to various corners of the solar system. Mars bases, Titan bases, and various other planets were filled with human footprints. Due to the government's policy of encouraging reproduction, humanity also ushered in an era of great population explosion. The government provided abundant resources, food, and education resources, allowing everyone to have more children without any worries. In order to adapt to the distance across the entire solar system, a new version of the warp gate, the spatial gate, was also created. If the warp gate was said to be a means of transmission, then the spatial gate would permanently change the spatial structure of two places. Through the method of high-dimensional folding, it would create a passageway that would never be damaged. Therefore, as long as humans drove spaceships to a certain planet and built the spatial gate there, they would be able to travel at superluminal speed and instantly travel between Earth and their new destination. Transportation within a planet would rely on the warp gate, while transportation outside the planet would rely on spaceships and spatial gates. This slowly became common knowledge in the entire human world. In the process of humanity's footprints slowly spreading across the entire solar system, Li Onping released many functions of the Mystic Network. The first one was the live broadcast function provided by the Mystic Network during the World Martial Arts Tournament. Next, Li Onping chose the method of a game, allowing the public to accept the Mystic Network as a replacement for the traditional network. A virtual online game known as martial arts was created under Li Onping's development. The game's content was very simple. It was a fighting game where one could choose the top 32 contestants in the martial arts tournament to battle. The only difference was that it could rely on the Mystic Network to connect directly to humans' consciousness, allowing them to enter the virtual world and control the bodies of the top 32 contestants as if they were controlling their own bodies. Once the game was launched, it immediately became popular all over the world. Next, Li Onping handed over a portion of the Mystic Network's interface for game development and launch, allowing more game companies to develop virtual games and launch them through the Mystic Network. In a short 3 months, as humanity's footprints continued to spread across the solar system, virtual online games became something that everyone had tried and even loved. From the beginning, it was guerrilla warfare for leveling up, fighting games, and the criticized erotic games. The variety of virtual games grew wider and wider. There was no need for Li Onping to do anything. Countless applications relied on the Mystic Network and developed at an explosive rate. Shopping, performances, meetings, making friends, movies, animations, the development of the virtual network, or rather, the Mystic Network, far exceeded Li Onping's expectations. Humanity's passion for the virtual world had truly exceeded his expectations. 3 months passed, and it was now the new year. Every human was lamenting over the changes that had taken place on Earth. On the night before the new year, basically every family in the Xia had a reunion dinner. On the other hand, the other countries, especially the countries in the Western continent, continue to celebrate the new year as usual. There were no changes at all. Su Xining's family was originally poor. However, they no longer had to worry about money. The brand new building, furniture, and various electrical appliances were all bought by Su Xining. In fact, most of the people in the village had already left for the city. After all, the government provided simple housing free of charge. Moreover, even with the existence of the Mystic Network, life in the city was indeed more exciting and convenient than in the village. However, Su Xining's parents were more traditional. They were still reluctant to part with the homeland that they had lived in for many years. At the dinner table, Su Xining's mother was persuading her son to quickly find a wife. Xining, you're going back to the moon tomorrow? I say, isn't your army too strict? You only give 1 day off even during the new year. Su Xining did not say anything. She only waved her hand. Under the control of the Mystic Network, the holographic image on the wall changed to the news channel. Dad, Mom, I specially took the day off today. Let's watch the news together. After saying that, she got her younger brother and sister to exit the virtual space on the Mystic Network to watch the news together. Looking at Su Xining's serious expression, they did not know what to do. They could only watch the news together. A few minutes later, Li Onping's appearance appeared on the television screen. Fellow countrymen, hello. In the 100 times gravity room on the lunar fortress, Jing Guang was lying on the ground, doing push-ups nonstop. Sweat kept spurting out from his pores. A female voice rang out from the communication device in the gravity room. Lord Jing Guang, His Majesty's speech has started. Do you want to go and take a look? It's something that we already know. What's there to see? After saying this, Jing Guang continued to immerse himself in his training for the day. Jupiter, inside the Great Red Spot. In this huge, gaseous planet, the violent gales were enough to tear all metals into pieces. However, amidst this terrifying gales, a black shadow stood silently in the air, unmoving. Sir, His Majesty's speech has started. Yinbei opened his eyes. A force field, with him as the center, swept away the violent gales in the surroundings. He said coldly, "Got it." In the White Land, 200 strange creatures had attacked the human base today. They were the natives of this land. They were creatures that were similar to the combination of dogs and wolves. They did not have much intelligence. Ever since humans had started exploring the White Land, they would often discover such creatures. Most of them had extremely strong vitality, and a small number of them could even pose a threat to the human army. Bai Xing had tapped out with a finger, and several tens of thousands of sword cheese tore all the monsters into minced meat. The surrounding soldiers cheered. However, Bai Xinghe merely looked at the endless white land and said, "It's about time to start." In the palace, Anna, Li Qian, Xiao Shuisu, Claudia, and Xia Yunyun sat together. Xia Yunyun's stomach was already as big as a 10-month pregnancy. On the other side, Anna's stomach was also slightly swollen. However, right now, their attention was focused on the 3D screen before them, on Li Onping, who was on the screen. Hello, I'm Li Onping, that you're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.